to the last episode in this series of the Starting Line podcast with me, Rich Leigh. Today's guest is Mark Sims. Mark is a CEO. I always do that. Why do I say it out in CEO? CEO? Who bloody knows? The CEO of P3. And P3 is easier to say, apparently, and a charity that helps people going through, in Mark's words, tough times. Now, that can include helping street sleepers. That can include helping people into assisted accommodation or supported accommodation. And these people are dealing with lots of issues, as you might imagine, from addictions through to mental health struggles. P3 supports 30,000 people, 35,000 people a year across 15 counties in the UK and does absolutely incredible work. So this was a privilege to have this conversation with Mark. And at the cusp of this conversation is the question, can we solve homelessness? Can we solve the issue of 300,000 people a year? It's a 14% increase. I'll get into some of the figures in the conversation. A 14% increase in the last year of people without homes, and temporary accommodation counts as being without a home. So it's a question Mark has an answer to, and Mark's answer is yes, it can be solved, and it is a political decision to not fix homelessness. So I'm conscious of some of the phrasing around it and not upsetting anybody, but either way, this is a great conversation and really important social issue. One that I hope in my lifetime, our lifetimes, we start to see the back of, because it impacts an incredible number of people. And further to, or proximal to homelessness, there are issues around addiction that we get into, and immigration and all these things. So it's, do you know what, for such a heavy topic, I think we managed to keep it fairly light. Mark's great at doing exactly that, and hopefully, I'll give as good as I get on that front too. So this isn't some deep, somber, upsetting conversation. This is hopefully an enlightening, positive, hopeful one. So with all that said, and with this being the last one, by the way, of this series, we will be coming back. Subscribe, or if you don't already, all those good things. Go to the back catalogue. There are some incredible guests, 30 plus guests at this point, I think. Certainly 25 plus guests. If you look there and you don't see somebody you want to listen to or watch, then I don't believe you. Okay? All right. Well, all that said, without further ado, I bring to you my conversation with Mark Sims, OBE. He was just awarded an OBE last month. Congratulations, Mark. Thank you very much. And to you, enjoy.
So I lead an organisation that works with people who are having a tough time. And I use that term, tough time, because I don't like to kind of pigeonhole where people are at. So some people don't describe themselves as homeless, some people don't describe themselves as having mental health problems, but sometimes people just need a hand. And I've worked with 900 amazing people who do that every day.
Nice. And those people that don't describe themselves, or possibly wouldn't describe themselves as those things, they'd admit that they're having a tough time.
Yeah, they're relying on organisations like us because they've either fell through the gaps of some services, or they trust organisations like us when they don't trust other maybe.
Trust's a big one, isn't it?
It's absolutely vital.
I was just chatting before starting. A lot of people have lost trust in councils and governments and things like that. And I guess organisations like yours show them that there are still people there that want to help.
Yeah, we're not impervious to that, though. If you look at the sector as a whole over the last 10, 15 years, there's been a rise and fall in trust in the charity sector. So you might not remember, or you might remember, I don't know, the Olive Cook stuff and Oxfam and whatever, and there's an undermining of public trust in
because of the CEO pay and
CEO pay, and the way charities fundraise sometimes. They're not, or I think they're a lot more honest now than they have been, but I think in the past people have been either less than honest or have been sensational. And I think sometimes they've fallen into a marketing groove rather than a mission groove. Yeah. So, the more sensational you are, potentially the more money you can make. But actually, it turns people off, not really gets them to understand what you're trying to achieve as an organisation.
How do you avoid that? Because marketing is a massive part of what you do. I mean, this is in effect a form of marketing, right? We're getting out there, we're telling people about P3.
Well, I think not-for-profit organisations in this country need to focus on their purpose and their mission. And once you do that, you remember why you were founded, what your purpose in society is. then if you speak to that story, that's what the public want from you. That's why charities exist. What some organisations do, they get hijacked by personalities, they get hijacked by fancy marketing teams, they get hijacked by hype. What's the latest thing? TikTok, you see charities jumping on the TikTok thing to get clicks and likes and stuff. Sometimes they fall into the groove of being either sensational or controversial, and actually it moves away from their mission and purpose. It might raise money, but what harm does it do to the people that you're there to support, the reasons you exist? Some really good examples of charities that are really true to their purpose and have been getting a load of controversial shit recently are like the RNLI. They're a really great outfit. Their mission is simple. They save lives at sea. They don't ask anybody a question who's drowning. They don't say, where are you from? Have you got any money? What's your name? They pull them out of the water and they save lives at sea. And I really admire RNLI for that. They come in for a load of shit, from people who talk about migration and immigration and think, talk about it like it's a taxi service. And it absolutely isn't. If you were in the water, if your brother was in the water, if somebody from Somalia was in the water, the RNLI are going to pull you out of the water and save your life. And that's how you avoid it. You stick true to your mission and purpose.
And do you feel like you've managed to avoid any controversy?
Well, I think we sometimes, working with people who've got challenges in their life, sometimes it comes to our door, and it's then how you manage it. The people that we work alongside sometimes are chaotic and can present a problem in the communities where they live. Sometimes communities get angry about that, and sometimes that washes up on our doorstep. And then it's how you respond and how you explain what you're trying to achieve. I think that's about as controversial as we get. I'm not a particularly controversial guy. I think most people in this country want to end homelessness and want to end the injustice of it. They want to see people with mental health problems live and thrive. They want kids to be well fed, well educated, and see an end to poverty. The Groove Vimin's a bit less controversial than some of the other organisations, I think.
I think so. Do you think we can? Do you think we can end homelessness?
Homelessness is definitely a political choice. Over the last few decades, we've seen the erosion of social housing, we've seen the erosion of investment in supporting people who've got complicated and challenging lives. And there's a political choice about that. To end homelessness, we can make the right political choices, invest in social housing, invest in social care, invest in dealing with some of the causes of homelessness, instead of just in spending money dealing with the symptoms. Is definitely a political choice.
Is that a party political choice, do you think, or do you think it sits across?
Well, that's where homelessness is a bit more complicated, because it's district councils, it's county councils, it's parish councils, it's planning authorities, it's government, it's investors, it's communities who might not want to see social housing built in their communities. It's all of those things. It's a complicated thing.
I mean, we saw that example, didn't we, of the bench that they were taking seats off of benches.
Or putting spikes on them
to
stop people lying on them. Yeah,
awful.
Absolutely. The gentrification of some of our communities makes the harsh reality of homelessness difficult for some people and communities and councils to swallow. But I think mostly in this country, people are compassionate and kind and think, if that was my son or my daughter or my husband or whoever, I'd want an organisation, I'd want someone to help them. But mostly I'd want them to have somewhere to live. Because there is a nonsense in this country, certainly politically sometimes, that successive governments have talked about how much money they've spent on supporting people who are homeless. And actually that's only dealing with the symptoms. The headline should be how much we've spent in creating new homes, new communities, places for people to live, and the support to make that a success. You can only be homeless if you've got nowhere to live. You can only have somewhere not to live if we aren't building new places for people to live. That's the truth.
I think I looked at stats before, shelters stats. It said homelessness is up 14% year on year. 3,000 people will sleep rough tonight. 140,000 children, homeless. I think we need to talk about and I think the wider figure is 300,000 or there or thereabouts. I'm not, I can't remember the exact figure, but speaking to that, I think we need to put some definitions to it, because there's homelessness as in rough sleeping.
Yeah.
And there's also, being in temporary accommodation,
Still homeless.
they're still homeless. That's what I think.
So
a
you
lot
have
of
people who are
don't
street
realise.
homeless. It's people who are visibly homeless. And even that number is argued about a lot. You'll know people who work on street outreach teams. The definition of sleeping out is you bedded down and made a bed. Now, so that's the number we count when we do rough sleeper counts. And I hate that term, rough sleeper. I think a rough sleeper goes under railway lines and holds garden walls up in fancy gardens. But people who sleep out, people who have no choice but to sleep on the street, they often are not visible because it's not safe to be visible. You wouldn't, if you or I were homeless, you wouldn't just lie on a park
I
bench.
often think if I were ever homeless, where would I go? Well, I'm certainly not going to be where I can be found.
Yeah, correct. So I think that number is probably bigger, and I think most people.
Could you put a figure on it?
Oh,
Have people tried?
Well, I haven't, but when I talk to people who've got nowhere to live, people who sleep out, and you say, how many people are sleeping out? You talk to organisations who work with people who are on the street in day centres and stuff like that. They open at 8 o'clock and they're full by 9, maybe 50 or 60. But then in that area, you're only reporting 21 people sleeping out. So it may be 2, 3, 4 or 5 times that figure. But I'm not really obsessed with the data, and I know a lot of people get obsessed with the data. I think the answer is to make it easy not to be homeless instead of making it easy to be homeless. So we see tens of thousands of families living in unsuitable temporary accommodation, often in hotels, travel lodges, Premier Inns, B&Bs, that kind of stuff, where kids are going to school in the morning with no breakfast because the hotel room's got no cooking facilities. So you see them. And people then say, oh, they can't be homeless, they can't be poor, because they're going into Tesco's and buying their kids a £2 cereal bar. It's because they can't make them a breakfast. They've got no cooker, they've got no oven and stuff. And we somehow talk about the money and the fact that actually housing people in hotels and whatever costs a fortune. But we never talk about the human impact of that. We never talk about the shame that kids experience when they go to school and they haven't got a packed lunch, because it's not possible to even make a packed lunch. So their parents either then have a choice about getting free meals, and we all know what sometimes the shame of free meals feels like, but we are bringing up a generation of kids who are ashamed of how they live. And it's through no fault of theirs, and it's certainly not through any fault of their parents. It's a societal choice to make families and keep families homeless and think that providing shelter is enough. And providing shelter and somewhere to live are completely different things.
If it's a choice, there must be a benefit to that choice. What is the benefit to that choice politically? Why is or is it just it's convenient not to? It's a convenient choice to make, or it's a beneficial choice. Which is it?
Well, I'll put it a different way. We've become a society where we talk about the deserving and the undeserving.
Yes.
So to have somewhere to live, you must deserve it. You must.
Which is a joke.
You must have somehow have earned the right to live somewhere. Right. So we've got these systems now where you have to have so many points. You get more points the more disabled you are. You get more points the more disabled you are. You get more points for having a child who's got additional needs. So what we're doing is instead of being homeless being enough, not having somewhere to live being enough, you have to have other things that make you more worthy than people who've just got nowhere to live. Now, how have we arrived at a society where just having nowhere to live is not enough to have somewhere to live? You've got to have other complications in your lives to jump up the queue, to get somewhere. So I bring it back to that thing about, is it all right then that we fill our streets with families and people with nowhere to live? If you're probably all right if you haven't got additional needs, if you haven't got an addiction, if you haven't got an offending background, if you're not a risk to other people, if you're not mentally ill, if you're just poor. If you're poor and you can't afford to pay your rent because your landlord wants to turn it into a B&B, to an Airbnb, and wants to charge you 1,200 quid a month, and you only bring home 1,400 quid, is being poor, relatively poor, is being poor in itself not a reason to have somewhere to live? So I think that's what we need to talk about instead of the other bit, which is like, what are the choices? That's the choice. The choice is that as citizens of this country, should we strive to give everyone a home? Because we know if you've got somewhere to live, you're less likely to have mental health problems. You're less likely to commit crime. You're less likely to not send your kids to school.
Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Yeah, shelter.
Shelter is the base level. then shelter, food, all of these things. But it's the fundamental thing we need and needed as we evolved.
Yeah.
What's the first thing you find? Shelter.
Well, we have a really simple strategy at P3, which has been a bit of a North Star for us. And we think the 3 building blocks of a great life are somewhere to live, someone to love, and something to do. That's how simple it is. So you give somebody somewhere to live, somewhere safe to stay, to feel connected to their communities, and that's how you build relationships. So there's someone to love is not Tinder or Grindr or that kind of stuff, but it's actually feeling connected to the community and the people around you and feel like you're important. And there's something to do is a reason to get out of bed in the morning. And that reason to get out of bed might be to go to the library, it might be to go to work, it might be to go to school, it might be to take your kids to school, but a reason to exist. And those 3 simple things are what make most of us thrive and get on with life. It's when any of those become at risk that we start to feel stress and pressure. And I think there's a really simple truth to that. So you, as a government or as a council or as anyone in authority, or whether we as a whole society decide somewhere to live has to be earned, then we're making a decision that people are lesser than ourselves. Because trust me, the people who are making those choices about earning a home, deserving a home, they're the ones who've already got one. They're not the ones who haven't.
So let's take it back to the beginning. You've been in the charity sector for 27 years.
Yeah.
Just recently been given an OBE. Congratulations for that. 27 years. How did you get into it and what were you doing?
So I always talk about the Lemony Snicket effect. My trip to the charity sector was through a series of unfortunate events, really.
Okay, all right.
So I originally worked in petrochemicals doing sales, and
Straight out of school?
straight out of school I trained to be a social worker, and then I was training to be a social worker, and then my family became homeless, and so I had to go to work.
Right, so you were trained to be a social worker, so there's already some empathy there, some kind of compassion there. What kind of upbringing did you have?
My mum was 18 when she had me, and much like in the 60s, there's a lot of shame around that. So
I was 18 when I had my first.
So my my mom, my dad was a drug dealer, and my mom kind of went away to have me, and then came back, and then I lived with my grandma. Like I was kind of like my grandma's child.
Were your parents inside at the time then?
No. My dad, my mum had nothing to do with. He's a bad man, and my mum met someone else who's now my dad, and they went off and lived in a council house and had another kid or so, and I lived with my grandma, and then my mum and dad decided that we were going to move back up home, as we call it, because we were originally from the northeast and we were living in the Midlands, and they came and got me, and we went to live in the northeast. My dad got a big job in the steel industry in Concert and the brickworks in Concert. Both of those shut down, and he came back to a glorious job in the mines in the 80s, which we know Maggie Thatcher went on to close. And like many people in the Midlands at the time, my dad ended up losing his job. We ended up losing our place to live.
How old were you at that time?
I think I was 14 I was. And we ended up living as a family in a homeless hostel in one room. So me, my brother, my 2 sisters, my mum and dad. And that was, it was in a room no bigger than this, sort of like a 10 by 12 room. And there were 5 other families living in that place in the same room. So we shared 1 bathroom, 1 kitchen, 5 other families, and it was council accommodation. Right. So luckily my mum's got an extended family, so my auntie Kath took us in, me and my brother. So my mum and my dad and 2 sisters lived in the homeless hostel, and I'd lived there for 3, 4, 5 months. I can't quite remember, because one of the strange things about that time was, although I had a lot of shame about being homeless, because you never told anyone you were homeless. You just got off the school bus a couple of stops before and walked through the park to the hostel. I quite liked it, because I lived in a hostel with loads of other mates. Like, I'd got mates. I'd get home every night.
Kids are brilliant like that.
You didn't have to go out and call for anybody. You got there. Your mates were there. And one thing about people who ain't got a lot of money, they share with whatever they've got. So probably for a long time, every night I got in, I had tea, whether it was my mum's payday or someone else's mum's payday, or somebody had got money or someone had got something. But it was great. You sat down every night. You had dinner with 9 or 10 kids. You went off playing, and as you did then. When you're 40, you don't know the harsh reality of it. The only thing I did know is I never told anyone, and I never told anyone for years that we'd been homeless, because it was very shameful.
Those circumstances, as you've just said, or as you touched on at the beginning, not of your making, and not just your making, but your family's making.
Yeah,
You know, that was made a decision to.
Yeah, but as a kid, when your mates are going off to as a kid, I was quite bright. So at school, I was in the top set for everything, and most of the kids in the top set, parents had money, and it's kind of like the Jess Phillips zone. I thought these people were all posh. You went to their house, they had cereal for breakfast. I'm sure my parents had much more stress about it than I did.
Yeah.
I mean, unusual. I mean, it's an odd thing, really. You know, like when you look back on it, I kind of just got on. I did well at school.
As you said, if you're a bright kid, you're putting one foot in front of the other.
Yeah, I just got on, and I had a job when I was 14, so I used to help. I used to set the stalls up on Mansfield Market, and I lied to them, told I was 18, and I was selling jumpers on a Friday afternoon and all day Saturday to make a few quid. And it kind of puts you in the right groove. Do you know what I mean? You think, you are to work.
You're surrounding yourself with people as well that work. And you see what hard work looks like.
And my dad has worked all his life. But even though he's working, he was poor. We didn't have enough money. It wasn't that we didn't have no money, we just didn't have enough money. And there is a thing about that. I mean, my dad worked full time. He worked at a place called Metal Box. And so I think those things kind of put you in a place. And I knew going to uni was never really going to be a choice for me. So I started at college after I got asked to leave sixth form after a year because I got caught smoking dope in the toilets with a few other people. One of whom is I'll leave that out. He's but okay. I'll leave that out. I'd rather not shame because I went to school.
Yeah,
we don't get on. So I was told I got to do my A levels in a year, which I did, and didn't do great. Or I didn't think I did great, but I've got a reasonably good memory. Mm-hmm. So I did all right, actually. And then I went on to college. And then we were just in danger of losing our house again. And I had to contribute. Wow. So it's get a job. So I got a job, and I became a credit controller because I lied, basically. It's one of those things, and you see it now, which is good leadership advice. When you go for an interview, whatever they ask you, can you do it? You say yes. Yeah, I can do that. I think you learn on the job. And what you do is you say, when you've been used to surviving and hustling, they say, oh, this is how we do blah, blah. I say, can you show me that? Because that's not how we did it at my last place, even though I've never done it before. Because my last place, I was making roller blinds, not actually doing that. And so I just kind of got on. And I enjoyed it. We hustled. And then I got to the point, and I think I was 18 and a bit, where I just thought, I'm done with this. I want an actual career. And I went to the job centre. Do you remember job centres back in the day? They'd have all these jobs on the wall. Yeah. Well, they were different now. You didn't have personal advisors. You didn't have to you didn't have to do anything. You just went in and there were jobs on the wall. It's a bit like shopping. And you think, oh, that's all right. You'd take it to the woman and she'd ring them and say, it was usually a woman because she was civil servants, and they'd say, are you interviewing for this job? And it was student nurses required, and it was in a place called Bromsgrove in Worcestershire. Mm-hmm. And I thought student mental health nurse, and so I gave it to her and said, I'm interested in this, and she phoned them and then she said, actually, we're interviewing next week. So, and they gave me an interview, and it was in Worcestershire, and I lived in Nottinghamshire. I had no idea I was going to get there. Mum and Dad didn't have a car, so it was got on a bus at Mansfield, went to Nottingham, got on a bus at Nottingham, went to Digbeth bus station in Birmingham, got a bus to the Alexandra Hospital in Redditch, it was actually, for my interview, and just amazingly got offered a job on the same day to start 2 weeks later as a student nurse. There wasn't all this clearing and stuff now, and that's what I mean, a series of unfortunate incidents. I just happened to go to the job centre that day, that job for some reason was in Nottinghamshire, and I did my nurse training, and I loved it. I loved working in psychiatry. I've never seen such compassion in my life, but I've also never seen such cruelty. I saw some nurses being really quite what I thought was cruel. I now know it's because they were as institutionalised as the people they were looking after. And I left home, so I lived in. I had a great time.
You did?
Yeah, I lived in the nurses' home and survived on 32 quid a week.
How did you feel leaving your family? Because that's a big thing, isn't it? You know, when you've gone through something together and then you go off on your own path.
Well,
what were your siblings doing?
Well, no, I didn't feel like I'd left because I never really felt. I always knew that was kind of temporary, and I think that goes back to the fact that I lived with my gran. And I no longer live with my gran. And actually, from 14, when I lived in the homeless hostel, obviously I couldn't have any mates stay over. So my best mate at the time, a chap called Sean Wells and his family, they were brilliant with me, Sean. And I often used to stay there. So I often wasn't at home. I often used to stay there. And they were really posh. Or so I thought. They were ordinary. His mum used to make quiche. I mean, it was the 80s. I mean, it was quiche.
Food that begins with a Q, that is posh.
Quiche, quitch. And Andrew had a jacket potato with it because I thought that was 2 meals. Right. Jacket potato or quiche, not together. Yeah. And salad. You know, they were really posh. And, you know, it's that kind of like... I knew I'd have to go away to make a career, and going to uni was not possible because only my posh friends really went to uni. I couldn't really do that, so I went and did that, and I loved it. And I became a nurse, became an RMN, and I was seeing a girl from home, Karen, and she became pregnant. You know, I'm sure I had a part to play in that. Yeah. And she was 18, and I was 20. And she moved in with me, although that wasn't really allowed. And that's how she became pregnant. We were sharing a single bed in a nursing home. She was working.
It's going to accidentally happen.
Accidentally, I'm not
These
really
things
sure.
happen.
She worked at the local pub as a barmaid, and it was the 80s. We both got big hair and terrible fashion sense. And so I knew then we talked about having a termination, an abortion, and we were going to do that. And then she just said... she couldn't go through with it, and I just said, well, we'll make it work. And so I transferred my training, which was allowed then, to Derby, where I finished my training, and we got a council house. When she was about... Stephanie was born in the March, we got a council house in the May. We were living with Karen's mum and dad at the time. We got a council house in the May, the night before I sat my finals. I was decorating really posh colour roll wallpaper on the chimney breast, only the chimney breast, and the rest of it was Council House Magnolia. But we were so proud of that house, you know. I think you just get on and you think, I'll take life as it comes, and I still live like that a bit today.
How many kids do you have now?
So I've got 3 kids.
Yeah, how old are they?
So 34.
I want dates of birth. I want star signs. I want
34, 31, and 25.
Right. Okay. And what do they do?
So my eldest daughter works at P3. She finds property for people who've got nowhere to live. My middle daughter works for the NHS as a nurse advisor on 111. And my youngest daughter does project management work for in the private sector. They've worked in law. All my kids have done various different things. But yeah, and I've got 6 grandkids and soon to have another one.
There you go. Congratulations. How then, so you're in, did you say Derby?
Yeah.
How did you get from Derby doing mental health work? And what were you doing, by the way? Were you kind of just supporting them on, like, people with mental health on a day-to-day basis?
So I worked in acute care in a hospital setting after I qualified. I worked in acute care. And then I've got a kid and a house, and I thought I need to be in management because that's where the money is. And that was a primary driver. So I thought I'll get a job in management. So I got promoted reasonably quickly. Then I went to work in the private sector as a nurse, and I got promoted even quicker. So I think by the time I was 27, I was a director of nursing services in the independent sector, and I worked there until... But I got to the point where, and this is what I mean about unfortunate incidents, I got to the point where I hated it because... I loathed the organisation I worked for, and I mean actively loathed them. Because we were philosophically a million miles apart. And I think this is a problem of organisations. When I joined, I thought they were great because I felt they really cared about the people that we were working alongside, that they were compassionate, they were kind, they cared about people that worked there. And as we got bigger, the board got bigger, and the people on the board became all about money. And actually paying as least as you can afford, extracting as much profit as you can get away with, and feeding people the crappiest food and the cheapest stuff became the thing. And I felt like every day I was going to work to argue for more. And I'm not a particularly right-on person, or I don't think I'm a particularly moral person, but I just felt like I can't have this argument every day at work, so it's turning me into somebody I don't like. I'm coming to work just to fall out with people all day. And I'll give you an example. One of the criteria for our care units was that we must provide people with a newspaper. so that they can stay up to date with current affairs. You must have newspapers. And so the director said to me, I will bring in my newspapers from home on a Monday, last week's newspapers.
Right, brilliant. It's already there a week behind. Yeah.
It doesn't say they've got to be current. And I just thought, you bastard. It's the underlying indignity and cruelty of it. And it was that moment that I thought, I need to look for another job. And he then told me that he couldn't afford to give anybody a pay rise. And this was like early 90s. I think some of our staff were on £2.75 because it's before minimum wage. And
Can you remember what you were on?
I think it was on 11 or 12,000. It was quite a good wage at the time. I was getting enough. My wife worked. I was getting enough money. We were doing all right. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Relatively speaking. And they were on like I think I was on about £8 or £9, and they were on £3 or £2.75. It was £2.75 they were on because I was arguing for £3. I remember the argument, and he said, "No, we can't afford it." And the next day, he came to work in a brand new Shogun, and I just thought, yeah, that's me done. So I resigned the same day, and I hadn't got a job to go to. I just thought, I can't do this one anymore.
I mean, that's a big, bold move.
Yeah, I was a nurse though, so I kind of thought,
knew that. Okay,
I'll go on
skill
agency.
set. I can find work, just not here.
Yeah, I'll just go on agency and do that, and that's exactly what I did. I went on agency.
Wonder what that guy does now.
He still does the same thing.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, still probably exactly the same kind of guy, isn't he? You know,
I don't think they're particularly successful.
Visited by 3 ghosts at some stage soon.
Yeah.
Don't know about it.
But that might sound pretty reprehensible, but if you look across some of the, like if you look at the children's care sector and the extraction of profit from that and how kids are treated in care, it just doesn't correlate, the two things. Yeah. When you're charging somebody 10 grand a week to live in a caravan and be supported by somebody who's, the day before worked in a chip shop and has got literally no skills to support kids with multiple needs. Those two things, it happens now. So I think...
Yeah, I mean, I bet the newspaper example is probably just a tip of the iceberg of the kinds of things it had done to profit extraction.
There was no overt cruelty, but it was that sort of underlying...
There's to your point earlier on, it's a deserving and undeserving. It's like,
it's
you don't
othering.
Deserve today's newspaper because
it's the othering, how we see people as different to ourselves. Yeah. And that's something at P3 I'm mad passionate about. And people probably think I'm a bit right on, but I hate terms like the homeless and rough sleepers and the mentally ill. I think the mentally ill is a great name for a rock band, but not for anything else. Because I think we've taken the word people and person out of almost every description we've got in society. So I have at P3, and I know it irritates people, but I have people we work alongside and people who work here, and that's the only people that I'm involved with. So people I work alongside and people who work here, that's it. And I think once you leave people in the equation, it becomes really difficult to start othering people and to see them as different as yourselves. Because I think the people that live in our hostels and live in our housing, they're thirsty, they worry about their electricity, they do all the things, they're worried about all the things that I'm worried about, and they have the same dreams as me, and they have the same aspirations and wants as me. They just might have had a different life experience to me, but they're no different to me. And I know a lot of people will say that, they're no different to me or you, so then why do we treat them as such? Like they've got no agency or no ability to think or none of that stuff, but also no rights. So as soon as you take away that, we start to talk about people who've also got no rights and no responsibilities. So we start to see them as people without agency, people who aren't able to make an informed choice, and it's because they're homeless or they're rough sleeping or they're mentally ill. And actually it diminishes people, it doesn't enhance anything. So that's the stuff that you see, that I've seen all of my life. I've worked with people who've got literally, I've not got a pot to piss in. And they're some of the most dignified, intelligent, hard-working people. And so to describe them as poor or as poverty diminishes them.
I love the saying, talent is equally distributed, opportunity isn't.
Yeah, exactly. I would agree with that. But as society, we are very much in this space of deserving and undeserving, and you can only use that when you other people and see them different to yourselves. And I think we've gone through a big period as a society over the last decade or so where that has definitely
It's
been...
only got worse.
It's only got worse.
I mean, and I do want to talk about that. I want to talk about immigration, things like that, and how that impacts the work you do, and the othering of people like that. I mean, I had a fantastic conversation in the first series of this with a professional boxer called Shabir Haidari. He fled Afghanistan, age 12. Talked about his harrowing journey here. Saved a baby's life on the 12-year-old kid. Baby was left in the dinghy by the parents, not great swimmers themselves. Shabir, also not a great swimmer, saved this baby's life. These are the stories that we don't get to hear about people that are just trying to make a better life for themselves. And you can call it bleeding heart liberalism or what socialism, whatever. But it's still their people. They are people that are just trying to live a better life.
We've been sold a narrative that is deserving and undeserving. And actually, when we make choices about fleeing, people who are fleeing from terror and war, and not to offer them shelter, then you have to look at society and think, is this the best we can be? It's that it's genuinely that simple for me. If there was a war in this country today, if we suddenly decided, there was a north-south divide and everybody from the south was against everybody who's north of Watford, and we'd have arms, and we all decided, we were going to we'd got to leave the country because we might die. I would genuinely hope there would be a country somewhere that would welcome us, not because I'm British, not because I'm white, but because I'm running from terror, and we somehow put a question in front of that: is, do you deserve to be saved? And it comes down to that, really.
How do you? So you just resigned, and was P3 then your next role?
So no. So I went to work. Series of unfortunate incidents. I applied for 3 jobs because they all looked interesting. One was as a care manager for the county council. One was working with the NHS as a commissioning manager, and one was a housing manager for an organisation called National Schizophrenia Fellowship, which is now called Rethink Mental Illness. And I got all 3 jobs, which is a nice thing. But all the interviews were on the same day. So I literally went from one... It's in the good old days when you used to have to write on an application form and put it in the post. And then they all came back, and luckily it tied up. And I actually took the job that was the least money, despite all the things I was saying about needing to earn more money. Because I went to National Schizophrenia Fellowship and I had an interview with a group of people who were so passionate about what they did. I thought, I want a bit of that in my life. Having just come from where I'd come from, I thought, I want a bit of that. I want to feel that, like, when I get out of bed in the morning, I want to feel like it matters. And I absolutely loved that job. I loved every bit of it.
What was it you did?
I was a district housing manager. I knew nothing about housing, but I was working with people who've got mental health challenges who were trying to... It was part of the resettlement programme of closing the asylums, was part of the challenge. So we've got 90 houses across North Nottinghamshire, across 4 district councils, with people living in them who were just trying to get on. And we were at war with the councils because they won't pay the rent to support people, because we were getting an enhanced rent payment to support people, and they were saying, prove you're supporting people. Well, these 8 support workers I'm managing, that's their whole job. And as I went to my first meeting, and they were talking about ASTs, which I'd never heard of, which are assured short-hold tenancies. I know that now. So I had to, after my first meeting, I thought I need to find out a bit more about this housing gig. And I have a woman who used to be the housing officer on the estate that I lived, and I had a conversation with her. I phoned her up. I said, look, I don't know anything about this, Jill. Can you help me? And she sort of gave me like a couple of hours of her time and just helped me to get to grips with it, and said, this is what you need to do. And so I took this back to NSF and said, I think this isn't how we need to handle it. And we went to the councils and explained clearly, compassionately and concisely what we're trying to achieve. And they all put us into payment. And so we were able to deliver a fantastic, compassionate service that only looked at people as people, not as tenants, not as people with mental health problems or any of that, but able to do amazing stuff.
And the funding was council funding?
Council funding. And the council were 100% behind it, because it's before the days we talked about impact and outcomes. We talked about people being happy and getting on with their lives, because that's the best outcome you can get. And we worked with these people, and we did amazing things for people who've got really big challenges in their lives, because we were able to say to them, what does success look like for you? Let's do that. because we weren't part of a program. We weren't.
So it was an individualised
It was a
approach.
completely bespoke support, and I worked with 8 fantastic people, 8 fantastic support workers who they collected rent and they worked with people, and they used to say things like, "God, you look fed up. Do you fancy going for a coffee?" And it was all allowed. You didn't have to sort of get anyone's permission, and I brought a bit of that back to P3 with me.
You have. So what made you leave that place then?
It became like the NHS.
In what way?
We became like this big national organisation that was run by finance people.
Right. Okay. So again, some possible loss of compassion, some possible loss of.
Well, it was
humanity of
the truth is we'd opened a couple of units for people who were the last people to leave an asylum, and I'd got somebody in the independent sector to build them and talk to people about what they wanted to look like. So, you know, they'd come out of these asylums and they had ensuite bedrooms and kitchens that they could cook in, and lounges they could sit in, and gardens they could walk in, and the wardrobes they picked themselves, and the decorations they picked themselves. You know, like the normal stuff we do. You say, and people, the nurses on the ward were saying things like they won't care, and we're saying, well, they might care. So let's ask. Let's give them an Argos catalogue and say, what do you want out of this for your new home? And we did that kind of stuff. And the organisation that I was working for just became focused about money. And I think it's because they were faced a financial challenge. And it started to feel a bit jarring. So I got a job back in the NHS as a commissioner. And
What does a commissioner in the
NHS for mental health services. And I never actually... No, I went back. I was there for about 3 weeks. And this chap who I'd worked with at Rethink, who had also left for the same reasons as me, phoned me up. He said, "I've got this amazing job for you in Wolverhampton." I said, "I'm not going to Wolverhampton, mate. I live in Nottinghamshire. It's a 65 mile a day round, 65 miles there, 65 miles back. I'm not here for that." And he said, "Honestly, come. If you come, you can work part-time. I'll pay for you to do a degree." And Martin Kinsella was a great salesman. I know that now to my detriment. And I remember we were away with the kids at Flamingo Land in a caravan, and we'd taken my Auntie Angie, who's disabled, and we were sat outside, and we were sat outside, and my phone was ringing, and it was Martin, and it was in the days of Nokia 3210, so the batteries never went. And he was phoning me saying, "Look, will you take this job?" And the money was like 30 grand or something. And he said, "If you take it, I promise you, it'll be the best time you have at work."
What role was it?
It was fancily called the Director of Services at the Good Shepherd Trust. And so, anyway, my missus said to me, "He sounds like a really nice chap. Why didn't you go and see him?" So I went to see him, and he interviewed me in Sainsbury's in Wolverhampton. I didn't realise it was an interview. I thought it was a chat. Him and a priest interviewed me. And despite going to tell him, you know, "It's good to see you, Martin, I don't want the job," I ended up agreeing to go and work for him. And I started on something like, I think it was like the 7th of July 2002. And he was in Greece on holiday. So I turned up for work at the Good Shepherd Trust, and Betty, who was on reception, had no idea I was coming, because Martin was the most chaotic and disorganised person I've ever worked for. And so I phoned him, and he said, "Oh, I'm in Zante on holiday, come back in a fortnight." I was like, "All right, well, you know, I've given up a job to come and work here." And so I just stayed, and I just thought I'd get to know the staff and the people who worked there. And I was genuinely terrified, because it was a pretty grim place. It was still like the 70s.
Grim in what way?
It was grim in that it was deserving and undeserving, and it was riddled with it. And it was riddled with absence of choice and absence of dignity. And there was a culture in that building that was not the fault of anybody's, but it was the fault of the 70s, because although it only opened in 1984 by Lady Diana Spencer, it was still rooted in its foundations in 1972, and the practice that went on there was grim. Right. And I went home and I thought, God, this is terrible. I don't want to be associated with it. I think Martin can sort that out himself. And I remember picking up the Nursing Times when it was a paper edition, and I was sat at my dining table, and I smoked then. I'd sparked a fag up, and I was sat at the dining table in our conservatory. It's the only place Karen used to let me smoke. And she always said to me, "I'd rather you smoke outside." And I used to say, "So I'd rather you pay the mortgage." But there we are. So I was smoking at the dining table, and she said to me, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm looking for another job." She said, "Christ, you just started that job." And I said, "It's terrible. There's no privacy. There's no shower doors on, and lads are sleeping in 4-bed shared dormitories, and you know,
And the Good Shepherd, what was it? Who were they?
it was run
mainly?
by 4 priests.
Right, and they were trying to.
It had been run on a holy mission sent by the Pope in 1972, and it was run by the Catholic Church, and it was grim. And I just thought I was genuinely terrified by it all. And some of the people who worked there were terrible people, and I just thought I can't work there.
How long was it that you, like before the first day there? When did you have this realization?
Within a week.
Right. So Graham, Martin's still away.
Martin's still away.
He's still living.
So
at his
I'm
own.
thinking when he's back, I'm going to get another job. So I start looking through the Nursing Times, and I told Karen this, and she said, "Oh," and she said to me, "It sounds terrible." I said, "Honestly, babe, it's giving me nightmares." And she said, "Yeah, well, imagine living there." And she said, "So instead of whinging on, sort the fucker out." That was her exact words to me. And so I thought it's pretty solid career advice from someone who normally doesn't take an interest in what I do for a living. So that's what I did, and I thought, let's have it, and so that's kind of the approach I took. I thought within a year this will either be different or it'll be shut, because it doesn't deserve to stay open
in its current form.
In its current form. It was a cruel place, and luckily,
cruel's a big word.
It was a cruel place. It was a cruel place. I'm not saying the people were cruel, but it was a cruel place. The structure of it was cruel, and we had people on lifetime bans. There was a list of people on the wall who were banned for life. Now, this is the only direct homeless service in Wolverhampton, and they were banned for life. So what happens?
Where are they?
Yeah, what goes on?
It's death, isn't it?
Why are these people banned for life? Oh, they told someone to fuck off.
Brilliant.
So they're banned for life. So they're homeless for life.
They just
Because it was the rules of the rules, and then there's the rules. And I what I did was I got people in who an amazing woman called Liz, who I'd worked with at Kingsway Hospital, and her daughter actually ended up coming to work for me. She was a woman who'd got addiction problems, and she ran a little organisation called Use a Voice, and it was a fledgling organisation. I said, I want you to come in, I want you to talk to people who live here to try and work out what they think good looks like, because that's what I want it to be. Yeah. And if I ask them, they'll say this is good because I've got power and control. And what came out of it was nothing about the shit food, the lack of dignity, the lack of privacy, the fact that you're sharing a room, but people wanted to be called by their first name. They wanted to be able to call me by my first name. They wanted to be seen as a person. And I know that sounds trite and poncy and all very politically correct, but they were absolutely right. They were seen as like just someone in that, like a sort of a bed rotation, someone who's in the bed, someone, this person who actually is always going to be shit at whatever they're doing. I used to get tales like, it's his 15th time out of Featherstone, he'll be back on the gear in 2 days, he'll be back shoplifting in 12 hours, and we'll be evicting him by Friday. And I was thinking, so we've mapped his life out for him. And instead of it become a place, and this is true of many institutions that get into an institutional way of, instead of thinking, how do we disrupt that? We were just accepting that's the way of the world. And so I wanted to kind of get in the middle of that. And in the middle of that was actually by saying to people, how do we disrupt that? And Liz and the people she worked with had this whole conversation. And part of it was about moving away from this deserving and undeserving. And part of that was rooted in the faith bit of the organisation. And that also needed to go. And so we agreed to part ways with the priests. They're still in Wolverhampton doing their thing. But we parted ways with them. It was acrimonious, all over the Express and Star, evil charity boss, house dedicated priest. And I wasn't even the charity boss, but it was me on the front page. Because I was absolutely determined. And what I actually did was I recruited a team of people who had got some had got experience in working with people with challenges, but they were I recruited for values, actually seeing people as people first, and that kind of stuff.
Which comes back to a question I wasn't quite sure when to ask it, but do you think that your upbringing has impacted your, I guess, compassion and the whole deserving and undeserving, and then how important is it to you, the people that you employ, that they might be able to find some empathy, not just a sympathy for?
Yeah, the truth is I don't know, because I think I'm an odd person anyway.
In what way?
Well, I think everybody's odd in their own way.
they are, yeah.
So induction at P3, I always say, welcome, you just joined 900 very odd people. And so I don't know if I'm the sum of my upbringing or if I'm the sum of the people I've come across in my life. Yeah. And the truth is, it's probably all of those things. And some of those things are in spite of the people you work with, and some of those are because of the people you work with. You think that's a really good quality, that's a really great thing. But the thing I don't think you can teach is kindness. And I've been lucky for most of my life to have people who've been kind in my life. So my family, my aunt, who I think at the time was only 21, she was just marrying her sweetheart, she just got a 3-bedroom house, took me and my brother in. She didn't have to. She'd got a spare bedroom, and she used to drop. I mean, I felt I was really posh. She got this Hillman Avenger estate car. She used to drop me off at school, and if we saw my mates walking to school, she'd stop and pick them up. And this is my car. She's got her own car. It's all that kind of stuff. And she didn't have to do that. But she's kind, and my grandma was kind, and my mum, even though she had nothing, she was somebody's hungry. If we had barely enough food and somebody turned up with no food, we'd have a bit less, but everyone would have some. And I think that's been, I don't know whether that's a festival of poverty or a festival of kindness, but it puts in you actually.
I think you rightly said at the beginning, the people that don't have a lot are often the first to share. Yeah. It's a big...
Because they don't ask any questions about whether you deserve it. Yeah. Because they know they don't deserve the situation they're in, but they're in it. And even if they do deserve it, even if you talk to people who've been on the rob and they've been to prison and they come out with nothing and they've got their grant, they've been released on day one, and you see them, and I know this, so I've worked in a service where people are unlocked from prison, and they've got their discharge grant, their release grant, 30 whatever quid, and they're at the train station and they've just bought 20 fags, and they see someone on that train station who's sleeping out, and they will go and offer them a cigarette. They won't wait to be asked. They'll, if they've already bought a bottle of vodka, they'll offer them a swallow of that, because it's within you. If you've got bugger all, actually, you know what it's like to have bugger all. So when somebody puts their hand out and says, "Here, have this," it's because you know what it's like to have bugger all. I think it's not totally enshrining people who've got nothing, because I've met people with enormous wealth who are some of the kindest people I've ever work with, and they are probably the sum of their upbringing, of their parents and that kind of stuff. I don't think people are innately cruel. I think people sometimes are surrounded by cruelty and mirror those behaviours, but I think people who've got little, very often their go-to places to share.
Because when you are going through tougher times and things aren't great for you, you go, why? Why is this? Why is this the life that we have? But the only thing we can do is try and take some form of control. That was, for me, was a big thing.
Yeah, I never really asked why, because I was accepting of what is, because I think you see what's gone before you and there's a sense of inevitability. So you stop asking why. And then I think the choices we make are about how we can change it or if we accept it.
Yeah.
Because
they're the only two options you have.
Yeah, the why, I think you only ask yourself why if you know it's not normal. Otherwise it's normal, so there's no why.
Yeah, I guess we were a funny situation, like, a council house in quite a nice place. We ended up getting evicted anyway. But council house in quite a nice place. So you could see what normal was because it was over the fence, or it was, so I think why
is it? So I suppose the question is, and I always would, people say to me, do you feel bitter about being evicted? And I'm like, the only people I can blame are my parents.
Yeah.
And so I blame my parents for being evicted. So I'm blaming them for being poor. Yeah. So actually they were just poor. And my dad worked, so had to pay the rent, but we owed a lot of people money. So Providence, Shopper Check, all them people were knocking at the door. So that was my life as a kid. Yeah. And I never knew, I used to love it when the Shopper Check van used to come on the street near Christmas. It'd open up and you'd have all fancy bedding, like pillowcases that matched. But, I'm not saying we were in abject poverty, because there were definitely people who were worse off than us. But you only know you're poor when you look back on it, knowing you're poor. Because I thought we were normal, and I'd got posh friends. Right. So one of the things I talked to my friend Tess about now, who also works at P3, is I always thought milk was 5 pints. I don't know if you know what 5 pints is, but 5 pints is powdered milk, and it used to come in the shape of a milk bottle. You made it up with cold water. So that's milk. Go and get some milk. That's why I went fetched, because we had powdered milk. The only fresh milk we had was at school, because 5 pints was cost bugger all. So it's those things, you accept what's normal. So when I started earning a bit of money, for me, a bowl of cereal with whole milk from the milkman, I had the milkman when my kids were little. For me, that was like a big, I've arrived.
It is funny, isn't it? The things that you look at and you think, I've got, yeah.
Buy Lurpak.
Yeah.
Go out and buy Lurpak. I mean, people say Lurpak.
Just anything branded.
Yeah,
anything
Lurpak
that isn't
butter. I mean, for me, it's those things. And it's strange, isn't it? What you, as a kid, I had 5 pints. We didn't have cereal. You put a bit of milk in a coffee, which actually was largely chicory. I always thought I didn't like coffee until I actually had coffee. But I don't think this is to be any. I don't want this to sound like I was really poor and my life was terrible. I had loved my childhood. I had a great time. I had loads of friends. I had a great time. But this was the reality of my existence. I only know now, in retrospect, how bad off we were. Because at the time, that's just what you rose to every day. You got up, and if you didn't have electric, you lit a candle. Or I'd get on my rally grifter and go to my grandma's, who lived about 3 miles away, and come back on my rally grifter with 2 bags of coal on the handlebars, and usually 50p or something, what my mum had borrowed off my grandma, to buy 10 cigs, a loaf of bread, some milk, and usually a tin of something to go on the bread. So we got a meal, and the coal to light the fire so we could have a bath before school. It was normal. We didn't have toilet roll. We just had newspaper. And this is only the 80s. It's not like in the 1880s. But I just never felt to detriment because of that. And I only know now in hindsight that we were really poor. But everyone around me was in that same boat. Everybody who lived on Matley Avenue, most people, my Auntie Fran lived opposite with her. We all lived the same life. The milkman the ice cream man sold fags and stuff. Lulu, the ice cream man. And you'd go and strap them on for your mum. You'd go unashamed, you'd go to the ice cream man and say, my mum says, can you do me 5 cones and 20 B&H king size, and she'll pay you next Saturday. Yeah. And he would do it. He'd just write it in his little book. And the next person will come and say the same thing. That's just what it was like on our street, on the places where we lived. And Lulu was fine about it. So I don't feel scarred by it. It's normal. It's like, I suppose it's like the French when they went to the euro. I only know the euro currency because I only went to France once when the francs were in. Right. Jess Phillips, who's an MP I greatly admire for her honesty, said a statement in Parliament which really resonated with me. She thought she knew posh people, but really they were just people that ate olives. And I think that's a true thing. When my mate Duncan, who lived at Nunkagate, I used to think him and his family were really posh. They used to have an exchange student who actually stayed at their house, and they had a caravan that they used to pull behind a car. And they weren't posh, they just lived in a 3-bed semi, and mum and dad worked.
It is
just
funny.
normal.
You take it for granted now. Now you know those people, but yeah, at the time I do remember thinking exactly the same thing. Really so how did you go then from, you've ousted these priests, you awful man you, and then things are on the up because you're actually treating people as they wish to be treated.
Yeah, well, we did a big change. We recruited a load of great people who started on November the 5th, 2002, and quite a lot of them are still there, thank God, and are doing an amazing job, and just moved the dial on what was possible and what was not possible. And also at the same time, we started to look to do other stuff from the ground up. So learn what not to do in that short period of time, and thought, you know what, if we're going to deal with homelessness, let's deal with it in a different way. So we opened 2 new places in Wolverhampton and a couple of places in Derbyshire.
And the funding is still council funding?
Still council. We bid for it. or we made a case for
This
it.
is 2002, you said.
2002
we're
back
talking-
end.
So this is Labour.
Back end of Labour, just going into Tory later on. And so we're just getting on. But I was almost agnostic about government because the funding stream was there. It was something called supporting people. Yep. There was an opportunity to maximise our impact through it, so we took that with both hands. And we just got on and did that. And I persuaded people who'd got money to buy us property and lease it to us. You know, we've got some people in Derbyshire called Anthony and Dimpner, who I went to see them because I knew them from my previous job and said, look, I want to do something about homelessness in Derbyshire and I want to do something for people who've got nowhere to live and who've got mental health problems. And they said, what do you need? And me and Anthony went to auction and he bought us 30 houses and rented them to us, you know. So, and we still got them houses today and we've still got the relationship with Anthony and Dimpner and we're deeply grateful for that because that was, part of the big P3 story, getting people to believe in your mission and purpose. And that's what I mean. Anthony and Dimpner are hardworking people. They've got plenty of money, but they're incredibly kind.
The Good Shepherd
Yeah.
became P3.
Yeah.
Got it.
So we spoke to the people who lived at the Shepherd, as it was called, and said, what does good look like? And they started talking about, see me as a person first. So that's the people bit. I don't want you to judge me by my past. I want you to see what I'm capable of. I mean, I'm shortening this. I mean, it took, these aren't words that they would use, but they're sanitised for this podcast. So potential, see me for my potential. So, and then we felt it's our job to make what's possible. So taking risks, being very pro sorting shit out. Mm-hmm. So either sorting shit out by sorting out what's wrong or sorting shit out by doing something better. So that's where the possibilities came. So it became People Potential Possibilities. We changed our name to People Potential Possibilities. They got fed up of writing that on housing benefit forms and shortened it to P3. So, if you can't beat them, join them. So that was our big marketing tool. The 60 odd people who we supported who've got nowhere to live, they picked our name and we just did it on word art on a computer that I got from Currys.
Yep.
So it became P3. And then my kids told me they used to watch a programme called Charmed. Yeah. And P3 was the name of the nightclub because it was Prue, Penelope and whatever the other one's name was, the Witches. So they said that's what the nightclub's called, P3. And I said, I don't care. I'm not really bothered about a name because I don't really believe in that kind of... I think organisations become their name, not the name becomes the organisation.
Okay, so... P3 is up and running at that point, so that's 2002, you said.
Yeah.
So how has it changed since then? And how is social support and funding and all of these things? That's 22 years.
God, yeah. So 22 years, I mean, that's more than one podcast, I think.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you about the organisation. The organisation changed because we started to do things right and I recruited some really decent people to work for us, some great volunteers and a great board. We had a great group of people who became our governors, who set out great ambition for us and challenged us to do more with whoever the government was, whoever the local authority was, tell the story about what we're trying to achieve because most people are good and most people are kind and most people will try and help you. And I have found that for 20 years. That's the truth of it. We work with some really smart people, whether it's Derbyshire or here in Gloucester. I remember I opened our first service in Gloucester when back in the day. And I was reasonably despised by the organisation who run the outfit that we were closing. I think I still am. I'm still blocked on their Twitter all these years later. But I don't think that was a great place. It was a night shelter where people all slept together in one big room and all the rest of it. And I thought we can do better.
Again, there's no humanity.
Well, I suppose it depends where you're seeing it from. If you're in it, definitely not. But if you think you're being goodly, then probably you think it is. But I think what has changed is society's changed. Our expectations for people has changed. Some good, some bad. The government's changed a couple of times. We had the coalition government, we had austerity. And for the first time in my working life, I had to make people redundant during austerity. We were doing great stuff for people having a tough time. and you know,
How was that for you?
horrible, and I chose to do that myself because these people had chose to work for me. So we'd got an HR function by then, but I did every one of those meetings and sat down and looked people in the eye and said, I can't afford to pay you because our funding's being cut.
When we talk about funding cuts, how much are we talking?
Well, it was in Derbyshire, and the funding was cut by 80%. And in fact, in housing, in our homeless service, it was cut by 100%. They decided universally, Derbyshire County Council decided back in 2010 to end all of their support for people who've got nowhere to live, and that's still true today. They don't fund a single service for anyone who's got nowhere to live. And so I thought at the time, a lot of organisations decided to stop providing services. And I was furious, in a rage. And so I decided that we would develop other services on a social enterprise model that made a profit. And I would use that profit to keep our homeless services open. So we moved into a childcare business, and we've still got some childcare business today that makes money.
Okay. So, how much are we talking here from 100% of funding was how much money to you?
Over £1 million.
Over £1 million just gone.
Just gone.
And you have to find that somehow by basically creating a social enterprise. You have to be entrepreneurial enough, and the people around you, to start a business that can fill that £1 million gap.
Yeah, and that's what we did.
That's what you did.
That's what we did. We filled that gap. We still operate all those services we did in 2010. We still get no money from Derbyshire County Council.
How much money does a social enterprise make now?
Collectively, as an organisation, P3's income is about 38 or 39 million pounds. And when I started, it was 400,000 was the income, but we were spending 500,000, so I had to sort that out pretty quickly.
Yeah. So how much of that is funding, and how much of that is you?
So funding is about 26 million, and trading is about 12.
Okay. So you've created a £12 million business there, which to necessitate, because you need to, because funding's been pulled.
Yeah. So that it's that combination.
Now I know austerity. I know we're talking post-recession, 2010. I know the arguments are easy for politicians to make, but what is happening? No money is being. Obviously 26 million you just said then, but where is that funding going, or what's happening?
The funding's still out there.
Yeah.
And
is it all
and
just
I think
grant-based now and you've got to apply? Or?
Well, there's solid funding now. Where we are now, we're sat in Gloucestershire. Mm-hmm. Luckily, you've got a great county council who protected that money for people who are vulnerable. I know they want more. I know they've got great ambition to do more, but they've protected that money. Other organisations like Derbyshire at the time decided not to. So it just went out the door. But Gloucestershire ring-fenced it, Warwickshire ring-fenced it, Wolverhampton ring-fenced it.
Who else didn't?
So
you work across 15 counties now.
Yeah, we didn't then, though. We didn't during austerity. So Derbyshire didn't. Staffordshire made massive cuts. Up and down the country, it was a different story. Worcestershire made different big cuts. But what we've got now is a fixed amount of money, but a rise in demand. So the separation between actually further investment and further need.
Well, we talked about the figures, 14% increase.
So it's exactly that.
So
what we've got now is the same level of income, but a greater demand. And so what happens when you've got that is the gateways to support start to narrow, and that's when you start to get conversations about the deserving and the undeserving, because the funnel gets narrower. And
what is causing this increase?
What's driving it? Poverty, rent, the cost of rent, the cost of property, Airbnb, council sales.
How is Airbnb contributing?
Well, Airbnb contributes to it by it removes what were former social homes in quite nice places like Cheltenham. If you can get 180 quid a night, you're not going to rent it out 650 quid a month. So it just removes those properties from the rental market. So it condenses the rental market in other areas. So that property comes out. I don't know how many Airbnbs we've got in Cheltenham, but I can tell you it's a lot. And Gloucestershire and the Cotswolds and so on and so forth. It becomes a problem because it becomes a holiday market as opposed to where you live. And then what then becomes available becomes a premium, and so the prices go up. But they don't go up the same rate as salaries. So salaries and the cost of rent is the proportionality is.
So Airbnb is contributing towards people
lack of
living.
investment in social housing. the nonsense that we've become to believe that some of the things we talk about, affordable housing, is really affordable when it's not really affordable. So we talk about affordable rents being 20, a percentage of the mean income and all the rest of it. What's all right, but I know lots of people who are on quite modest income that £1,200 rent is just a nonsense. So I was talking about it actually this morning with colleagues in Stroud. They're over the moon because they found somewhere for someone to live that's only 650 quid a month for a one-bed flat. It seems reasonable. But if you're on a salary of minimum wage, £11.44 an hour, 650 quid, is more than a third of your take-home pay, much more than a third. So then you put your council tax on, your heat, light, and water.
Yeah.
You're poor before you start.
How do we help?
So how do we help? I think a number of things. One, the issue about Rent Act. That's a good thing. Building more social homes, it's got to be a priority for everyone. If you think back to the early 80s, we had people who were homeless. The issue about people who had nowhere to live then, people like my parents, was that they were poor, not that they couldn't get a council house, that they'd lost it because they couldn't afford to pay the rent. Yeah. Now we've got people who just can't even get into a council house or a social housing rent. We need to build more social housing, and we need to go along with that. We need to provide support to people to help them budget, to help them understand that stuff, and also to deal with the.
So there's an education aspect to it as well.
Education and support. It's both. It's not one or the other. Sometimes when I look at services like we work in Kensington and Chelsea, you'll know the price of property in Kensington and Chelsea. We worked all the way through Grenfell Tower and the injustice of all of that.
I wanted to come on to that.
And what I see there are rents at £5,000 a quarter. And I think who can pay £5,000 a quarter in Kensington and Chelsea? So nearly everybody I know who works in Kensington and Chelsea doing the work that we do travels in. No few people live there. And the ones that do live there, they live with their mum and dad or their legacy people who have had their council flat since 1972. And I'm not deriding Kensington anybody. I'm just saying in the 70s, you had council housing. In the 2000s and 20s, you don't.
The visibility of people who are homeless is seemingly increasing. If you were to walk into Gloucester Town Centre now or city centre, there seems to be more people that are street drinking, seemingly people without homes, right? Whether that's the case or not, whether they're in, supported housing, we don't know. But that visibility and I guess the volume of people, that's something that I think we used to have cash. We're a cashless society predominantly now, so we don't help with change like we used to. So this issue is almost hard to talk about, but I think it scares people. It turns people away from city centres. How do we help those people help themselves? Because that's the.
So let's get into the brass tacks of it. People who are sleeping out generally are homeless. So a lot of the antisocial behaviour you get in town centres during the day are not necessarily people who are homeless. It's people who've got somewhere to live, but they go back to former lifestyle. So they'll go back to drinking. They'll go back to hanging out with people who use gear, use substances and that kind of stuff. So don't be fooled that everyone you see street.
That's why I wanted to talk. That was an awful question, but to get to a point which is, people will watch and listen to this.
That's not to say they haven't got a set of needs. That's not to say they haven't got addiction stuff. That's not to say any of that. And
but there is an intimidation almost at play here as well. Again, you walk in. I'm a big guy, and I walk in, and they're still, lots of them are in groups drinking and almost unashamed about the fact that they're noisy. Aggressive.
Antisocial behaviour is antisocial behaviour.
Absolutely.
Whether you've got somewhere to live or you haven't. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like, I'll put it a different way, right? People always say to me, because we've got 900 properties that we rent out, largely to people who've got nowhere to live. But what I won't have from people who live in their properties is when they start effing and blinding and making threats towards our people or their neighbours and all that kind of stuff. We can't tolerate that behaviour. People don't come to work. People don't live next door. Most people, and I tell you, by and large, the people who live and work in communities where we've got properties where people who've got nowhere to live now live are very kind, and they welcome them in and make them people just become part of that community by and large. But people have got agency, and I don't ever want you to think that I'm of the ilk where it's like poor people who've got nowhere to live, they've got no choice in their life, because they have. most people have. Not everyone. If you've got severe mental health problems, you're shouting at noises at stuff that's because you're not well. But don't confuse antisocial behaviour and people who are homeless. The two things are separate.
Yeah, I think
people
it
who
does
are
get
homeless,
confused an awful lot.
People who are homeless have got nowhere to live. People who are demonstrating antisocial behaviour, whether they've got somewhere to live or not, are demonstrating antisocial behaviour. So don't conflate the two. And that's kind of how we approach it.
Do you think enough is done about that antisocial behaviour?
Honestly, I don't know, because I think in different places the response is different, and sometimes it's good, better, and sometimes it's worse. And like I went out on a few years ago now on one of our task force days in Wolverhampton with the city centre management company. So we had the police, we had addiction services, we had our street outreach services, we had our court diversion and liaison. Like loads of us went out to talk to people who were either looked like they were sleeping out or were causing problems. We didn't find anyone who was causing problems got nowhere to live. They'd all got somewhere to live. So the people who were sleeping out because they've got nowhere to live. Although on saying that, we're now starting to see some people who are sleeping out because they feel unsafe in their accommodation, because they're being cuckooed. You're getting people moving in with them and taking over their property and throwing them out. So on paper it looks like they've got somewhere to live, but in reality their property's been taken over by drug dealers or whatever. So vulnerable people who are vulnerably housed with no support often get exploited even in their property, so it looks like they're still homeless. So the situation's complicated.
Play here. Another issue, let's talk about drugs and addiction in general. Our uncle was a heroin addict, ended up dying. So, we've seen it up close. We've seen when he was big and fat and he wasn't using. Then we've seen him at, tiny and skinny and jumping out of our upstairs window to go and score. He told me a story once about how he walked into Dixon's or Comet or whatever it was. And he said, basically, it's a terrible lesson. Maybe it's a useful lesson. Look like the man that's doing the thing. Basically do it unashamedly, do it confidently. He's like, I walked out with the TV. I just walked out with the TV like I was supposed to be walking out with the TV. And
we used to have a shoplifter called Frankie who's died. One of the hostel that I managed in Wolverhampton, and he was the best shoplifter I've ever met. He could shoplift in Argos, and he did shoplift in Argos. Do you remember when Wii's first came out and they had this like boxing gym thing?
When what? Sorry,
Wii. The
oh
Wii,
yeah, of course, yeah. Nintendo.
So he came back to the hostel and he'd got this like whole boxing ring set up that was for the Wii, where you got the controllers, but it was a boxing ring. And I said, where you had that from, Frankie? He said, Argos. I said, mate, you can't bring that here. It's stolen goods. And he had nicked it out of Argos window, just confidently walked into Argos and stole it. Now, people often, like me, I mean, that stuck with me. Like, how the hell do you nick from Argos?
It's impressive, and it's so bold.
I mean, it's just a confident... But what was fueling that was the need for drugs. So actually, the balance of it is that you'll take any risk. People share needles. They do really dangerous stuff. We had a kid who we fostered, me and my wife. He was brought home by my daughter Stephanie and said, can you help this kid? He was 14 and he was using about 80 quid's worth of heroin a day back in the day.
How much?
About 80 quid. He was going to die.
How are you going to find 80 quid?
So, and he was about 6 stone. And my kids are compassionate people. And so anyway, he came to stay with us for a bit, and he ended up with us for a few years. And he got clean, and he ended up doing a good job and all the rest of it. And one day when I got home from work, my missus was outside crying outside. We had a little 3-bedroom house, and we'd done the loft. We'd had the loft converted for him, but not properly because we didn't have a lot down. So it was like a pull-down ladder, but a proper room in the loft. She said, I've just been up in the loft because I was 40 and she'd bought me a Blu-ray player. Do you remember Blu-ray? And we'd got like this lockable room in the loft and she'd hid it in the loft. And she said, and your birthday present's missing and the door's been forced in the loft, and that was this kid's room. And I said, he won't have took it. He'd never do that to us because, we'd been through hell and high water together. And then I noticed that his room was extraordinarily tidy. And what he'd actually done is he'd nicked everything out the loft, everything with a plug on, and he took it to cash trades and sold it. And he looked like me. Before I had no hair, I had ginger hair, and he looked quite a bit like me, and people thought he was my son. And my mate run a phone shop in Kirkby where I lived, and he walked in and he confidently tricked my friend into handing over to handsets of, there were these Sony phones that had music on them and a jog dial. They were all the thing. They were a fortune. And said, and because he called me dad, he said, my dad's said, just sorting these 2 phones out. He'll come in and sign on the contracts later. And he got them. And this was overnight. And you know what that was? He'd met somebody on the bus who said, do you want to smoke? And he'd smoked some heroin. And overnight, he'd gone back on the gear. And this is 4 years later. And that's the grip heroin can have on you. Just that one time. And that one time, he turned his back on all that. He'd got a great job. He'd learned to drive. He'd got a girlfriend. For all intents and purposes, he was absolutely clean. And he met a former associate on the bus. And the next time I seen him, I was fishing him out the bus station toilets at Sutton because my mate had seen him in there, covered in piss, covered in blood. He'd absolutely was so ashamed of where he'd come from that we had him back at the house and sort of got him onto treatment. But the next thing he did was he nicked my car and he just up there and stole my little girl's money box and all that kind of stuff. And then he went to prison. He ended up doing some other stuff and he went to prison. And I went to see him in prison and he said, and I always remember what he said to me. He said, the shit I've been through, and he'd been through some shit in his life, I could never feel it when I was on gear. But when I was on gear, every day, when I wasn't on gear, every day I felt that, every day, all day. It was there, like just hovering in the background, the stuff that had happened to me. And I could live with it most of the time. But when somebody says to you, do you want to not feel it for a little minute? I didn't want to feel it. But then heroin got me straight back. And he went from a kid who would only wear Burberry and he wouldn't wear Snyder's, he called it. He earned a lot of money. He went out and grafted to have proper clothes and proper posh stuff, to lying in piss and with a needle hanging out of his arm, having just nearly gone over and all that kind of stuff. That's the grip it had on him, and it's still a battle he endures today. 17 years later, he's got 2 kids. He's got 2 missuses with 2 kids, and he's in and out of our lives. We don't tell him where he lives because he would burgle us. He definitely, because my dog knows him. Well, I've got a Rottweiler. Anyone else comes to my house, he probably wouldn't let you burgle us, but he'd let him burgle us because he knows him. But and these are the challenges. And I look at mums and dads, and I'm not his mum or his dad. And my love for him is not entirely unconditional, because sometimes I loathe him for what he's thrown away and what he's done to us. But mostly I love him because I know what the kid is underneath all of that. But I look at parents and brothers and daughters and aunties and uncles who've got family who are on heroin, and I know that person without heroin is a wonderful human, but with it they can do the most despicable things, because the love, the need, the desire for that drug takes away any dignity, takes away any compassion, care or kindness. But that's not to say they don't regret every minute.
No, and that you use the word shame or ashamed. I completely, you see it, you know it. That's every day they're living with that, and the only thing that takes it away is using. Now,
I'll just finish that. So my dad, I alluded to the fact my dad was a drug dealer.
Yes.
My biological
what did he
dad.
deal?
Heroin.
Right.
He's a dealer, and he was reasonably well known locally, and he was never in my life until I was 14, and then he tried to kidnap me for some unusual. I was thinking, why is this bloke following me? He looks quite like me, and I never realised that my dad wasn't my dad. I never knew that. No, even though it is blindingly obvious, because I was ginger and pale, and my brothers and sisters, if you see them, are exactly the opposite of that. And my mum and dad have both got dark hair. So I never really, look at the photos now and think, how didn't I know? And when I told my mum about it, that's when she sat down and told me. But fast forward there was lots of incidents about that, but fast forward a few years, Christmas 1990, Christmas Day 1990, it's my little girl's first Christmas. My gran phoned me on Christmas Day and said, they've just found Tosh dead in his flat, and I'm thrilled. It's the best Christmas present I've ever had. That was my dad. And she was thrilled because...
Your gran on your mum's side, yeah?
My gran on my mum's side. Because of the misery that they'd been through for years, my gran and my mum, of living with that. We don't know if he was killed or if he had it, but we believe the story was he was murdered because of all that stuff. And the harm that drugs do to individuals and families is, and I have no expertise to offer to it. I worked in addiction for a while, and I still struggle with the whole concept of 12 steps, getting clean, harm reduction. I flit and float and knock about the whole thing. But what I do see is that everyone I've ever met who's had an addiction, in their soul, are a decent human. But what takes away their humanity is the gear that they're on. And I'm always in the front of my mind, I'm able to separate those two, both from my personal experience and my professional experience. So I have no answer to what do we do about drugs.
Well, that's what I wanted to get onto is decriminalization and the potential impact that could have for the people that you support. And I mean, how do you feel about that?
I don't really feel anything about it because I don't give much thought to it.
Let's walk that scenario through though. Yeah. So
I've been to countries where it's been decriminalised. Yeah. I've most recently been to a place that does open source methadone and stuff like that, and they all work to varying degrees, and they all don't work to varying degrees, and people have arguments like you decriminalise it and it starts to create access points for people who don't have an access point. I don't know if that's true.
You find drugs. You find drugs. If you're an addict, you find drugs. Like let's not pretend that I couldn't walk out in 2 minutes and be.
But then you say that. But how many people now are using vapes that would have never have smoked?
Yeah.
So you look at harm minimisation, and I'm all for harm minimisation.
That would only be the case if then you can go to the newsagent and buy heroin in something called bubble gum,
But I guess what I'm saying from my experience, I've asked myself a million questions, and I'm pro it lots of times, and I'm against it lots of times, and it depends on the situation I'm faced with. I haven't yet arrived at a perfect solution, but I do know for some people, if we legalised it, it would change their lives for the better in a million ways. And I know for other people, they have told me if we legalised it, they would have never got off. So it's both. You have to listen to both of those stories, and the truth comes to what we need is a personalised approach to addiction, and actually saying things like what'll work for you is probably the best thing we could say, instead of saying one size fits no one, because that's what we offer. We offer often a total abstinence model or a harm reduction model, but we don't actually ever say to anyone, actually, what works for you, because we'll do that. We offer them this or that, or often it's just this.
I guess I see it, and I'm more for decriminalisation than certainly against, because I see it as recognising the humanity of people that are addicted, and that's and understanding that they need support and help. They don't need to be.
So when I went and spent time in what they call shooting galleries, I went and spent some time at a couple of different places, looking at the addictions question about shooting galleries where you can go and get your gear and inject safely and get support and all that kind of stuff. And they work, they do work for lots of people. But there are people who've come off them who said the reason I stayed on as long was because it was easy.
Right.
So that's why I'm in favour of a personalised approach of actually saying to people what will work for you. And if that involves getting people gear and decriminalising it for that individual, then I'm in favour of that. I'm in favour of personalising stuff, personalised approach, and saying, what do we need to do to make it a success for you? So opening up the possibilities. There's an organisation that I've started to talk to and understand a bit more recently, Cranston, who are an addictions charity, and they're going all around the world looking at different solutions because they think yes or no is not the solution; it's just yes or no. And I'm in that mindset now, having looked at pros and cons.
What do we need to be able to offer a personalised approach? I don't actually know the statistics for in relation to. I don't know if we'd even be able to find them. Heroin addiction. Or,
I think what we need to do is start to gather data about what works and what don't work, instead of what we do with addictions is a bit like what we do with. It's a political choice. It's like if we choose to deal with addiction by decriminalising heroin, it becomes a political question, not a data-driven question. The evidence might suggest to us that the best thing we could do is decriminalise drugs. Actually, we've got to sell that idea to the politicians. You wouldn't have to sell the idea of this drug we've got here will cure all cancer, because they just take it, because that's politically palatable. What's politically unpalatable is decriminalising any drug. So I think we have to build a case for what works, rather than saying, if we do this, let's see what happens.
This needs money.
It needs money. It needs money. It needs data insight. It needs more understanding, and it needs a much bigger conversation with the public at large, and a turning of the dial on: do we continue to tolerate addiction and all the misery that it brings, or do we start to look for a solution?
Most people just turn a bloody blind eye to it and forget the impact that addiction does have, not just on the person but the family.
Yeah. Well,
most people don't experience it.
It's like homelessness, though. It's because they don't experience it.
They don't experience it, or they other those people. Smackhead.
It wouldn't happen to my kid.
It wouldn't.
Every parent I've ever spoke to whose kids got on gear, whether it's that or coke or whatever. I went out recently and I met a group of people who were all working in an academy school, and we had a great, they were out and I was out with friends for work, and we all work in the job that we do, and they all do the job that they do, and every single one of them was doing coke that night. They were all doing line after line of coke.
Yeah.
And that has become an acceptable face of drug use, doing lines of coke. Now, I don't know when that became acceptable. And also, I don't really want people... My wife works in teaching. Most teachers would say they don't earn enough money. I think it's hard to justify if you're going out on a Friday and doing 200 quid on coke. But I kind of guess... It's a societal question, the addiction stuff. But until we're comfortable having a dialogue about it and talking about what the causes are and what some of the solutions might be, it'll always be a political question, because there's so much stigma attached to it. And until we address the stigma, it's like the mental health stuff. We started to address the stigma of mental health, but 20 years ago, you would never have had someone who would have gone to work and said, oh, I'm bipolar. You get people now who regularly make that statement, I'll say I'm bipolar, because it's become all right to say that. And until we start to say, oh, I've got an addiction, and how do you manage your addiction? What works for you? Then we will always have this political thing.
It's disadvantageous, isn't it? Socially and professionally disadvantageous to say, I have an issue here and I need support through it.
The great work that people like Mind and Rethink and people with lived experience do is talk about their experience of how they've overcome mental health, or how they live with their mental health issues, and normalise that, and start to say, yeah, I'm a barrister and I'm bipolar, or I'm a pilot and I've got schizophrenia, or whatever it is. And until we think, Christ, is that really possible? That you can have quite a severe mental illness and lead quite a normal life, apart from when you're not well, when you need a bit more support. That's become normal. But 40 years ago, we put them in the asylum that I worked in at Barnsley Hall in Bromsgrove, and we left them there. Yeah. And it needs a societal shift on dial. The same question around drugs, I think. It needs a public health response.
I mean, how do you see it day to day? Do you see the impact of drugs?
My colleagues do.
Day to day?
I rarely work on the front line. I spend a couple of days or 3 days most months going out to services to remind me why I do this job. I never got into it for spreadsheets, budgets and strategies.
Every charity organisation business looks the same when you're the leader of it. Like, eventually you're dealing with the same staff issues, the same HR headaches, the same salary, as you said. So that's an admirable thing to then get back out. And
well, I do, and I make a nuisance of myself. And I'm sure if you speak to my colleagues, either they like it or they loathe it, or it makes them nervous when I turn up, or it doesn't make them nervous. I'm sure. So I came this morning down early doors, and I just swung into the Stroud office, and I didn't ring to say I'm coming into the Stroud office like I did. But by the time I got to Cheltenham, they knew I was in the county.
Right, so they're like, someone's way. Okay.
Everyone looked very busy. I'm sure they look busy all the time.
What do you see when you go into when you went into Stroud? What's going on?
So when I went in, I first of all got there, and there was someone waiting to see one of my colleagues, and he was clearly someone who's got struggles with mental health. He was responding to voices that there was no one else in the room, and I had a chat with him. But he was just telling me that he was there and that he was a reasonably regular visitor, and that the person who who supports him with his stuff was really nice and decent, and his visits to that service keep him well, even though he's not particularly going for an issue. His issue is he's going to connect with another human and talk to him about his week. And so that was my first thing. And he told me how to get in the building because I couldn't work it out. And then I was just chatting to colleagues about the results of the election, about some of the work I've been doing with new government, and
What are you doing?
About holidays, helping them to understand that social housing is the answer to issues around homelessness. And so I'm doing some of that, and then talk to them about holidays, about life, about family, because I want people to feel like I see them as a person, not as somebody who is just an employee.
Well, you said 900 employees.
Yeah, no, I think about 980, I think,
980,
today.
so we're talking 1,000 people.
1,000 people, yeah.
Directly employed by P3.
Yeah. So, and I make it my business I do an induction session every Tuesday, it's online. Mm-hmm. So I tell people about the organisation they join, what we stand for and what we won't stand for. And so it's not a corporate induction where HR are for this.
It's hard at scale. It's hard to divest impart your passion at scale, or do you find it
no, it is harder. So I always remember we won Sunday Times Best Company to Work For quite a lot of times in the 2000s. First time 2005, last time about 2015, I think. And we were about 500 people. And I used to say, yeah, I know everybody by name. And I did. I knew everybody. I could genuinely say, that's blah, blah, blah.
Well, you said you had a good memory earlier on.
So. Yeah. So I knew everyone. I don't really know everyone now. I mostly remember bits about them. And, and I'm sure people would find it patronising if I just churn that out. But what I try and do is I try and give them the human face of the organisation, so that if they're pissed off with stuff that's going on at work, and they will be, if they've got a problem that they can't talk to anyone else, they can talk to me about it. If they experience racism, misogyny, homophobia, whatever it is, and they can't talk to anyone else, they think they can get in touch with me and I'll listen to it. I won't necessarily agree with everything they say, and sometimes it is be careful what you wish for. I have had people feel very pissed off that their manager expects them to be at work,
That's awful.
Yeah.
Frankly.
Yeah, frankly, why should I come into work? Because that's what it is. But to try and keep it real, and because that's the reason I work here, and I don't work for the NHS, and I don't work for organisations that see people as try and commoditise people. So I want people to be the best version of themselves. I want them to be authentic. I don't want them to try and channel someone. When I worked in children's psychiatric services, we were in a ward round, and we'd got a kid who had appealed against his Section 3, and rightly had appealed, and he lost his appeal. So he was being deprived of his liberty. He was 19, I think. So it was adolescent services. And he went out of the ward round, and he promptly started slinging furniture around and smashing the ward up. And I was the manager of the ward at that time. And the social worker came at the side of me and said, we need to restrain him. I said, I'm not restraining him. Because I tell you what, if somebody had told me I was being locked up and I hadn't committed a crime, I'd be really angry. Yeah. And I was 19. And she, for all, and this isn't knocking social workers at all, but I think this was something wrong with our culture in the early 90s, where we tried to talk to this guy about managing his anger, and that his anger was the wrong response. And I think his anger was the right response. And actually chucking stuff around when you're not well is probably all right. It's better than chucking people around. And I just said, just leave him. We'll just buy new chairs. And she tilted her head to one side and said to him, I can see you're really angry. Let's talk about why you're angry. And I think, fuck off.
Yeah, that is condescending. It's like, yeah.
Because that's the bit I'm talking to you about, the humanity, and I don't want P3 to be like that. I want people to understand that it's all right to be human, and it's all right for people to be angry sometimes, and it's all right. It's not all right to treat our staff badly, and it's not all right to treat our volunteers badly. It's not all right to treat one another badly. But if you're angry and you're then not going to go on and we get it. Sometimes we say to people, you can't use gear on our premises. It's not allowed. We don't allow it. And they're pissed off with us about that. And we have to say, well, them's the rules. And it's all right if you're pissed off, but you still can't use gear. You still can't be a nuisance to your neighbour. You can't have a party at 3 o'clock in the morning. And if you carry on, we might have to ask you to give up your property because you don't have a right to make other people miserable. That's just about being a grown-up. And they're like, you can't fucking tell me what to do. And we're like, we don't want to, but we'll tell you what not to do. And what not to do is make yourself a nuisance to other people and not to threaten colleagues or not to be horrible to your neighbours and all that kind of stuff, or not to break the law. That's all reasonable. So that's the organisation I join. I'm hoping that it is a legacy, and we are not perfect by any stretch.
No organisation is. I thought that a moment ago. No company organisation is
No,
perfect.
and I never want to get out of bed and think we get everything right, because I know we don't. We often get things wrong, and I think part of the adventure for me is putting things right that we get wrong, and the reason we get them wrong is because we're trying to do more stuff right. And I've got people, I want them to do the right thing, and sometimes that means I'm getting stuff wrong.
How old are you now, Mark?
I'm 56.
56. What do you want to do with what does this look like? Is it scaling up?
So, no, I think our organisation's growth is my biggest failure. Because really, I would have liked to have ended homelessness 2 years in and said to everyone, right, you're redundant because we've sorted it all out. I would have liked to have ended the misery of poverty, under the last government, but, we didn't, we failed. And so my organisation's growth is a symptom of organisational failure, because the problems are getting bigger. So we're getting.
But that's taken a lot of responsibility for it, needlessly.
Well, it is a symptom. I'm not saying we've failed, but it's a symptom of failure because my colleagues
There is
don't
a social
fail.
failure.
Yeah. So we work now with 35,000 people every year, and I think probably about 34,000 of those interactions with people are really successful, and the other 1,000 probably aren't, either through we've got it wrong, we've employed somebody who's let somebody down, our rules aren't great. So learning from the 1,000 is just as important as learning from the 34,000. And but that's not to detract from personal responsibility either, because you can have all the problems in the world, and if you're going to be a dickhead to somebody, you're being a dickhead to somebody. So they're willful consequences. So it's always that balance, and I literally wrestle with it every day. I get people who ring me up and say, my manager's treating me terribly. And you say, why? And sometimes their manager is treating them terribly, and you say to their manager, you're treating them terribly. And don't do that, because it's not how we behave at work. And sometimes they're being a dick. And you have to say, actually, it's very, very reasonable that you turn up to support the people you're there for on time. That's all right, because we've made them that promise that you'll be punctual. And just choosing not to be is not a choice we want you to make. Yeah. And people get pissed off and say, but what about my mental health? And you say, yeah, well, what about the mental health of the people you support? And there's a balance there. So if you're telling me your mental health's getting in the way of you being on time, I don't believe you, because I know millions of people who've got mental health issues and have managed to be punctual because it literally requires no skill. Yeah. So sometimes it's confronting people with the reality of it. Sometimes it's saying, shit, we got that wrong, and how do we not get it wrong again? And sometimes we get things wrong 2 or 3 times before we manage to put it right. But I think for me, is as a leader, is understanding that what I really want to do is only get things wrong once and then put it right. An organisation at scale that works with people, and I want them to be people first, not process. So if I was making widgets and we were out by 0.0001 of a millimetre, I would expect to get that right the second time round. But if I'm saying to people, go out and work with people and be kind, caring and compassionate, be punctual, show people you matter, don't sit on your phone in front of people when you're supposed to be present with them. Sometimes the people we employ a lot of people who've had nowhere to live or have got mental health challenges. Sometimes where you come from can get in the way of how you deliver the service to people, and some people don't like it, and some people love it, and some people love the support worker they've got, and some people loathe them. And one of the things I say on my induction is you'll get on with most of the people you come across, and some people will hate you. And it won't be necessarily through any fault of your own. But if everyone hates you, that probably is. But if some people don't like you, then don't think it's your challenge to overcome that. Just say, I don't think we're getting on. There might be someone better on the team that you connect with. That's a success.
You said that you're talking to the current government, the new government. Who are you talking to?
Well, I'm talking to all the departments. Rather than say names, I'm talking to the departments I work with. I have to be careful because I'm a charity commissioner as well.
I was going to get onto that because you're on the board of the charity commission, right?
So I kind of wear two hats.
Yeah.
But the conversations that we've had with current government going in were that they're definitely in listening mode, and you look at the stuff, the travel policy direction gives me great hope that they've heard
their whole
what's been
platform
said.
has changed, right? I mean, in politics, you've got two platforms. One, we're doing well, stick with us. Two, change. It's stick or twist. That's what you got. So the whole platform for Labour is change, and change brings hope. Hope brings confidence. I mean, as a business owner, that's the mantra that's what I'm telling myself. Working in marketing, having come through the toughest few years marketing's ever seen, PR and marketing's ever seen, I'm hopeful. All I want is a change, which brings a hope, which brings a confidence, which increases spending and support. That's so. What kind of changes, or you say they're in listening mode? What are you talking about? What are you throwing their way?
It's kind of the whole thing for me. Is the somewhere to live piece is that they're saying we need to build more homes. We're going to change legislation to let that happen. We need greener energy. We're going to change legislation. It's all they're moving some of the stuff out the way that's been in the way for a long time. I'm not saying they've got tons of money, but they're also saying things like we need to make work pay. We need to get people into work. We need to get the economy thriving. And you might say the other government did that, but they weren't delivering on more homes. They weren't delivering on the economy. The stuff that Trust did in that mini election impacted so many people who'd already got so little, it was almost unforgivable. And so what we have got, you're right, is hope and the prospect of change. What this government's got to do is deliver on some of that change. But the first raft of policies that they've set out, the first 40 bills that they've put through legislation, gives me great hope because they're putting into law the fiscal lock so we can never have another mini budget. Gives me great hope. The fact that we've got an independent, and I do work with amazing people in government who are civil servants that sit there and say, actually, the Office of Budget Responsibility will be the ones who'll give some data on that and to make it allowable or not, gives me great hope.
How much of a part does immigration play in the increase of homelessness or people without homes in the UK right now?
For people who've got nowhere to live, not much, because most people who are not under if you use a last set of language, people who came to this country illegally have no right to accommodation. So they would be people that organisations like ours can't use government funding to support. We can't house them, we can't help them, we can't get them off the street, we can't do that. So in terms of our work, immigration has no impact. In terms of other work, like social housing and stuff, so Serco, big outsourcer, got a contract to house asylum seekers or people who've got, come to this country on boats and stuff. And so they went around buying lots of property, private sector, or leasing it. So they took a lot of social homes out for that purpose, or tried to. And so I think that might have had some moderate impact. But the biggest impact is on perception. So the biggest impact we get, like I see it on Facebook all the time, house veterans before migrants. Yeah. Well, every local authority in the country signed up to a charter that says people who've served in the armed forces will be treated much more favourably than people who haven't when they're making applications for housing, health, welfare benefits. Whether it works in practice or not, I don't know, but it certainly does at P3. We signed the Veterans Pledge. We look at and we work with lots of veterans organisations really favourably. In terms of homelessness, in terms of our work, it doesn't largely impact. In terms of the sense of despair and desperation, I feel it massively impacts, because I think the answer is actually starting to assess people's claims and determine whether people have got a claim to asylum, and then as soon as we've determined whether it's a claim to asylum or not, if it's a claim to asylum, then we need to start the integration work into people into our communities, because I have yet to meet somebody who comes to this country who doesn't want to work and earn a living and have a better life than the one that they've left. So all the stuff that we get about bullshit migrants coming and living on benefits, honest to God, I've never met, I've met a lot of people who've come to that. I've never met anybody who thinks that's a good way to live. They come to this work to get on and earn a living. If you look at some of our homework clubs in our social enterprise, the people who make absolutely advantageous sprints around around exam time for kids, and nearly lots of them are second generation migrants because they want their kids to do really well in education. and succeed. So the perception problem, the stories
It's been politicised. So
the political narrative we have been fed.
What was the Rwanda 700 million?
700 million, 4 people went.
4 people.
Yeah.
700 million.
Yeah,
It's good to know that our taxes are going to good things.
Well, I reckon if you'd have given 700 million to either migrant organisations, like Migrants, or Shelter, or Crisis, or P3, or CCP, or any of them people, they would have made massive inroads into homelessness, health, addiction, whatever it is. So I don't see that, the Rwanda policy never really made sense to me. Other than that, it was headline grabbing. Yeah. And there is a slight rider here. Lee Anderson is my constituency MP, and he was a great supporter of the Rwanda policy when he was a Tory. And it's something that we have divergent views on. I just felt it was a political policy, not a practical solution to ending the misery of people running for their lives. And so I think as a country, most people in this country are kind, caring and compassionate. And if we hear those stories that people are running for their lives, around the world, gay and bi and trans people are murdered for being gay, bi or trans. And I think most people in this country would, in open arms, welcome people who, if they live where they live, that would mean that they'd be murdered, would say, come here, mate, we'll look after you, because we're a kind, caring and compassionate country. What most people won't do is house people or help people that they think when they're having the piss taken out of them, and that's the story we've been told. So, earlier I was talking about poor people, mostly share. So the truth is, though, when we introduce othering into that, because othering starts to lead you to believe that the small bit you've got is going to be taken by someone else. That's a narrative we've been told. So it doesn't matter how poor you are, these brown people or these black people are going to come and take some of that. And actually, if you go in the places and spaces, if you go to the estate where I live, Coxmore in Kirkby, if you go to the places there where they've got brown faces, and when I was a kid there was only one non-white family living on that estate. Now there are lots more. They're as poor as I am, as poor as I was, and they're united. They're collectively. That sharing still exists there. It's not because you're brown or you've run from some war-torn country. What they see is someone else who hasn't got a deal either. So we're all still sharing. We're all in that economy of being poor. They don't think that anything's been taken from them or removed, or that they've got a council house before anyone else or any of that stuff. They see them as just the same as them. Poverty is a great unifier.
No, absolutely.
So what we've been told, what the political narrative have been taking from us is nonsense.
There's a comedian, Theo Von, who does a good bit on that, on exactly that, and he's like, I'm there. Like, do you think that I took your stuff? He's like, to his black friends, he's like, you don't have shit, I don't have shit. I didn't take your stuff.
Yeah. But I think, and exactly that, and you see, that's the stuff that gives me great hope. So I see people who have very little. During COVID, we heard amazing stories of neighbours who've not spoke for years because they were from somewhere else. They were making, my gran, bless her, died during COVID, but she talks about the Indian woman around the corner who knocked on her door and said, "Do you want some curry?" And she said, "I never want curry," but it was nice of her to ask. And that nice of her to ask stuff, they've never spoke. But they've spoken at that time. Yeah. It's a unifier. Yeah. I think Hina, which is a town not far from me in Derbyshire, 10 years ago was described as the most Anglo-Saxon town in England. But you're starting to see that when you start to see communities change. But I think we only believe it when we don't experience it. So when you go to Treadworth, do you feel like... My question to you is, so when you go to Treadworth and you see that black family who lived in Treadworth for 20 years, are you scared that you're going to be shot, stabbed or murdered?
No, I'd say right.
Oh, yeah, exactly. And when I'm on the estate where I was born and raised, and I see people, they know my mum, they know my gran, they know all the people that I know, and they talk to me. They think I'm a doctor, largely because I'm a nurse and I'm a bloke.
Right, yeah.
And I worked.
You couldn't possibly be a nurse, mate.
You know, morning doctor, morning, you know, that kind of thing. And it's kind of like all of those things. You're just part of the community. You're seen as who you're seen. I'm Pat's lad. You know, when I got my OBE, the stuff going around on Facebook was this. I won't say the word, but it's a 4-letter word, from Coxmoor, which is the estate of Grant, has got an F in OBE. You know, it was a bit of a shock because we're all from Coxmoor and nobody does anything.
How did you feel
like that? Well, I'm not really great into Empire. It has a lot of problems for me. But I'm reasonably sure if I hadn't have accepted my OBE, my mum would have murdered me dead in the street because she's more proud of it than I am.
You're not the first to say that. I spoke to the founder of Go Compare, and she was saying basically how her mum was the exact same. She's like, I don't really care about this. I'm just a business person, whatever. And her mum was like, you bloody you are taking that over you.
So when I look at that community, the community where I'm from, what unifies them, the things, one, we've got this problem with drugs and all that kind of stuff on the estate. That goes across every community.
It absolutely does. As you said, poverty
still remains a problem with poverty. There remains a problem with access to housing and all that kind of stuff. But their collective view is that we're just getting on. They're getting on because for most people who ain't got a deal, it's about survival. And they're not really interested if someone from foreign lands is coming to live in that community, so long as they're not taking what bit that they've got. Nobody actually is. But what they're being told is beware because they might. So, the reason you can't get to see a GP is because of migration. The reason you can't get anywhere to live is because of migration. It's the easy
thing to blame on rather than the pulling of public funds, right? Yeah, and that's essentially what's happened here it's like, no, it wasn't us, it was him.
The real decline in social housing began with selling council houses, Yeah. So...
Was selling council houses a good thing or a bad thing? Because it was an aspiration for a lot of people.
I think it's probably a good thing if we'd have built more at the same time. If we'd used the money we got off them to build some more, that one. But that was a fallover, is that we didn't replace what we got. So I know people who bought their council house, and you could always tell who they were on my estate because they were the first ones to have brown windows.
Brown windows?
But they had brown UPVC because the council had stopped.
It's a bit of a keep up appearances. Yeah. You remember, what's the name? Bucket.
They had wood grain UPVC. Of course they did. And they had a UPVC porch. And sometimes they took the front wall down and put 2 rows of slabs in to pull the car off the street because they didn't need the council's permission because they owned it. And they were, they did all right. They did all right. And then they died and they left the house to their kids and their kids got that very deposit and they moved on to other greater things. So, I'm not decrying any of that. But where the fallover was that for everyone that we sold, we should have at least got one more. And we didn't. So actually the number of council houses reduced. And the growth of housing associations is one that has taken over the responsibility of local authorities to house its population. And my own view is if we'd have kept that with local councils, then democracy would have held them to account for not doing it. Whereas housing associations are largely undemocratic, so can do what they want.
Yeah, and they're private companies.
Well, we've got a housing association in P3 that houses, that it's a small housing, it's a small specialist housing association. Did I want to be a housing association? No. Did I want to be a landlord? No. Why have I got a housing association? Because we house people that other people won't. And so, instead of moaning about a problem, I tried to create a solution. It's over-regulated. It causes more problems than it solves, and I'm an absolute firm believer in. I love the fact that the council where I live is building council houses again. It gives me, I know the difference it made to me as a kid, and I know the difference. It makes an
enormous difference, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the, as we said right at the beginning, it's the fundamental, basic need of humanity is shelter, and if you can't support those people, I think a lot of people will hear that and just think, well, those people need to get out there and work harder. Yeah. And again,
do they deserve it?
It's deserving and undeserving.
Democracy is a great thing to drive change, and council housing and the running of council housing and be held to account for that. If the council are your landlord, then what better way to show to use your democracy to change.
So what does the next 2 years look like?
Well,
for
I'm
P3?
on a workout. The board have agreed my retirement date, so I'll be leaving P3.
When are you off?
We're going to start to recruit for my successor in the summer of 2027. So 3 more years. And then, depending on how that goes, then I'll be gone.
Are you going to be part of the recruitment process?
I bloody hope so.
Yeah. I wasn't sure if you felt like it was...
Well, we've got... in truth, at P3, there's a big crowd of people who are waiting for me to go because they want my job, and I'm delighted about that. And I'd rather have a competition than not. And there's definitely talent. One of the great things that I'm able to do is bask in the glory of the brilliance of other people that work here. Because somebody once told me, the best thing you can do is recruit people who are better than you. And so I've managed to do that quite successfully. There are about 900 of them who are much better than me at loads of different things. So the next 2 years looks like that. But in truth, not a lot of change. I'm still ambitious to do more. I'm still ambitious to end more problems. I'm still ambitious to have a better organisation. I'm still ambitious for the people we work alongside to change their lives for the better. And I would love it. I would absolutely love it if we've got someone on our board I think he's 18, and he's in one of our services. He's not actually in one of our services, but he was. He was a care leaver who'd got nowhere to live, and he's on our board. He's effectively now my boss. And he got up at our conference last year, and he said to me, he said on the screen, I am going to apply for Mark Sims's job when he goes, and I bloody hope he does, because that, for me, there's no better testament of an organisation than one that I never feel I'm leading it, because I think I've got 970 leaders. I feel more like I'm curating it, and the fact that I've got people who've been in our services. Jim, who leads our homeless service in Wolverhampton, is 75, 76, and he was street homeless when I started. He lived out on the street, and he leads our street outreach team now, and he's fantastic. He's got a house, he's got a brilliant life, and it's all credit to him. But the fact that you've got people with that real lived experience making a difference gives me great hope for the future, because that way we won't become like that bloke who used to say, I'll give you last week's papers this week, because they won't have it. They won't tolerate it. The people I've got here challenge me every day to be better, and they challenge themselves to be better and hold one another to account.
Are you going to be able to watch on as it's taken
away
from you?
Oh, I won't, no, because I'm nosy now.
What are you going to do? So
I'm just going to delete my socials, and delete socials, and hopefully do a bit of stuff I want to do. I've in my adult life, I've been to uni and done stuff that to help me do this job better, and none of it's really helped, to be honest. I try to do the things what business people tell you to do, understand strategy, understand money a bit more, and actually I've got people who understand it still infinitely better than me. So what it looks like for me probably is that I will be friends with a lot of people who work here for a long time, and I'll listen to them moaning about work and think they ought to sort that out.
Yeah. I think having spoken to you now for a couple of hours, I feel like you're just going to really miss it.
I will miss it terribly. But you also have to know.
Struggle.
I came to this job thinking it's probably a 6 months to 2 years job. Yeah. And I love it. I love every bit of it. I love the people I work with. I love the people we work alongside, and there's definitely me in it. Yeah. And Martin, who recruited me, went off to do a secondment to the MOJ, and sadly he didn't return from that. He got cancer and died. So I was acting chief exec for a long time, and so I never really thought I'd be the chief exec. It was never a plan. I've never had a career plan. I've never thought I want to do this, and these are my deliberate moves to do this. It's been a lemony snicket career. The only thing I do know, though, is that I do a lot of miles. I do this job in an unusual way, and the sun is setting on that style of management and that style of leadership and that stuff. And I know.
Why do you think that?
Well, because I think there are people more talented than me who can do things better than me and quicker and smarter and faster than me with just the same ethos. And so you kind of have to know my skills were relevant, I think, in the 1990s or 2000. You need to go before you get found out that you've run out of road. And I know when that is. And I think if I don't set a date, I would never leave.
Okay, so we're talking 2027.
When we'll meet my successor, and I will be definitely gone by early 28.
Right. What are you going to do? What do you do in your spare time?
So I'm a charity commissioner, as we've touched on, and I love that work. I never thought I would. And when I applied to do that job, I knew there was heavy competition. Mm-hmm. But part of it was to help me understand why I look at the sector sometimes through less than tinted red, thinking, why do people behave so badly? Mm-hmm. And the what I've actually found is a group of civil servants who are brilliant. There's about 500 of them in the Charity Commission, who are just as passionate about the impact charities can make on society as I am, which was a revelation. I just thought there were civil servants and they were all there for the pension. But actually, the money's not great there either. But they're mad keen to see what we do as being impactful. And what I do get to see, and what I hope I'm able to influence, is some of the charities that misbehave are held to account. Some of the ones that are naughty are held to account and made to change their behaviour. And that the Commission is fair, and that it gives people the rules that they've got to operate and holds them to them rules. So I think without it, we'd be in a mess. And I'm not a big fan of regulation, because sometimes I think we regulate for regulating's sake, just so we can tell a good political story about it. I don't think that's the Commission that we're in now. I think it was the Commission we were in a few years ago, but the chair, Orlando, is absolutely determined to remain fiercely independent of government, and that gives me great, because he's regulating the sector for the sector's sake, not for politicians' sake. He's acting on behalf of society, so that's a good thing. And I'm involved in some other stuff, like I'm involved in a little tiny charity in Birmingham that works with people who've been in prison and are rebuilding their lives, and I love that. I get a big kick out of that. It takes me back 20 years, and I'm involved in Big Issue. I'm on their board, and and they've just gone.
So you don't have enough to keep you busy. All the things you've said there are professional things.
Yeah, well, I might not do any of them.
Right.
That's the thing, because what I really want to do, really want to do, is not. I want to go to things like my grandkids' nativities, because I never really had time to go to my own kids and that kind of stuff. And your grandkids are definitely the kids you always wish you had, because you can indulge them, and you don't have to say no to anything, and I never do, and I'm unashamed about that. And I declare my house is like Switzerland in the Second World War. It doesn't matter what sanctions are at your house; they don't apply here.
Right. Okay.
So once you cross, we live across a bridge over a river. I say, once you've crossed the bridge, you're in Switzerland, so they can have what they want, they can do what they want, they can go to bed when they want, and all that kind of stuff. The only thing I don't do is I don't let them go on the socials. So when you come to my house, you're not allowed your phone or your iPad.
I had a great conversation with somebody talking about ill mental health, social media, and the fact we can almost say now it's causation, not correlation. Yeah. It's particularly among teen girls. Yeah.
My granddaughter's had a hell of a time, and my daughter had a terrible time.
Any of these, except for yours, don't know if you will listen or watch, but make it that one, because it's an incredible conversation with somebody who's he's a researcher. The book The Anxious Generations, the New York Times bestseller. So it was a fantastic conversation.
So I've read the book.
You have?
And I've listened to this. There's a whole community in Ireland of parents who don't allow their kids to have phones. They have phones, they don't have smartphones.
We're back to the 3210.
Well, there's a lot to be said for the 3210. I wouldn't. I drive an electric car now. I live with range anxiety, and I've just got used to living with battery anxiety on my iPhone. But so they don't allow kids to have their phones, and the outcomes that they're getting are that they've got better relationships, they play more, they're healthier, they feel more connected to the real world. So I don't think everything about digital is terrible.
Of course,
but I think we are letting kids spend too much time in
their whole thing is overprotecting the real world, underprotecting online, and the impact of that. So you have read it.
So I've read it. I read lots of things because I like to know a bit about a lot of things, and also because a lot of the time I'm confused about lots of things. So these bipolar debates, these not bipolar, these sort of polar debates that we have about what's right and what's wrong. So, you know, as soon as you get down the trans stuff, the migration stuff, the divisive conversations that we have in our communities that are often fueled by people who want us to vote for them, that I try to understand it, and I meet people who've got a range of life experience, and I never make my mind up. I'm always moving about in the spectrum of do I agree or do I disagree.
You are figuratively,
Yeah.
you embody Switzerland.
So my cousin is, I'll give you an example. So my cousin is trans, and I never really understood it, but what I can tell you is she is happiest I have known her in her whole adult life. And so whichever side you are on the debate, what I am all about is people leading their best lives and not making other people miserable while they're doing it on an individual basis.
Talked about that
so you do what you do, you live your life in the best way that you can, but you don't have a right to make other people miserable doing it.
What do you think your legacy will be? We're talking about retirement. What do you think it will be, and what do you want it to be?
Well, I look. It's interesting you say this because someone else asked me this question at the weekend. One of my friends who I was getting very drunk with, and we were missing one of our friends who died. He said, "What do you think your legacy will be?" And I think it's my children. That's my legacy. I think work won't be my legacy, and I think the organisation won't be my legacy because it's a charity, and it's owned by 950 people and 35,000 people in the society. I just hope when they look back, they don't think I was too much of a dick. But I think a lot of people will think, he got that right and he got that wrong. And I think that's probably fair. But I think what I hope is that history will judge me as somebody who tried. And I think that's all we can do. And I know I haven't got everything right, and I don't want to. Because if I got everything right, I'd be one of them people I couldn't bear at school who always got everything right. And I now know that they got everything right because they were scared of getting anything wrong, not because it was a pursuit of doing something right. It was the absence of doing anything wrong. And I think we too often, as a society, do that, and that's why we end up not knowing the answer to drugs, not knowing the answer to trans, because we all think we're right and we all think they're wrong, and that's why I flit about in the middle all the time about these debates. Is it right we do this? And then I meet somebody and they absolutely convince me that their life is a good way for them to live. So that's kind of where I get to. I think if your life's a good way to live and you're not inflicting harm on other people, live your best life. And you know, I hate all that bullshit slogans, you know, that live, love, laugh that goes on people's walls, and we have this sanitised version of, you know, what people eat for their tea and, you know, rate my plate and all that, you know, all the social, and you know, and I'm on all the socials, TikTok, Insta.
I saw one of your dances.
Yeah, well, you might very well have done. And I'm on all this because I want to know about this stuff. I'm naturally inquisitive, and I want people to talk to me about it, and people challenge me, they do. And I want to know what's going on. And I think it's when we don't, that's when the problem.
I think curiosity is a superpower.
Yeah,
I think
so
it's incredible.
remain curious.
Absolutely.
Remain curious and never make your mind up. Because I think once you've made your mind up, you stop becoming curious.
Yeah. I mean, it's the way to stay young. I genuinely believe it. It's the way to stay. I'm the happiest when I'm I'm an idiot. Teach me. I don't know anything about that. Tell me. Yeah. You know, that's when I'm happiest, is when I'm learning about something I didn't know.
There's stuff I don't like. I don't like some music because it really gets on my nerves. Like music that makes no sense to me. I don't really like drill. I don't really understand it. I absolutely love seeing people who are talented do it. But would I listen to it after I've seen them? Definitely not. I don't like people who have their headphones on too loud on public transport, so you can hear that vague thing and you think, is it mine? So you're emptying your bag, or you're looking at your phone doing that. I don't like that. I think that's just bad manners. But it's mostly stuff like that. As I get older, I start to think, is that my phone? No, right. It's not. And so I don't like that. I don't like the fact I'm getting old and I've got ailments and that I see people getting old. That's rubbish. So I don't recommend that. But the stuff I don't like is intolerance and people who aren't curious and people who think they know the answer. because they've met somebody once in a pub who told them something. I meet people in pubs who tell me stuff, and often it's the exact opposite of what the last person's told me. So I remain in the middle ground, trying to make my mind up and looking for evidence of one way or another. The only certain things I know are the fact that stuff that makes people happy is rarely drugs, it's rarely addictive stuff, it's rarely poverty. It's about the things that when you've got somewhere decent to live, you've got people who matter to you in your life, and you've got a reason to get out of bed. Those are the three basic ingredients, and I think if you've got them, good for you.
And is that success to you?
You've made it if you do that in different ways. One of my friends who came on Saturday, I had a bit of a party at my house, and these are my friends from when I was a kid, and they are a weird bunch. But I can get shamelessly pissed with them, and we laugh and we cry together, and we have rules about no phones and all that. We don't even need to say it because none of this stuff would ever get on social. And I've got people who I have led absolutely the opposite life of them. You know, I've been reasonably successful in my career. I've got a few quid. I own my own house. By most people,
You're an OBE.
I've got an OBE, and well, that's what the party was for. Yeah. And what I can tell you is that my OBE was only mentioned when we were all pissed and people got up and started talking about it, because it's now described as our OBE. We've won it between us. It's, you know, they're sharing it with me. Not my choice. It's entirely theirs because they believe I'm the sum of our friendship. But what I can tell you is somebody sat there and talked about their life and how they feel they've been a success. And I completely agree with it, that their life has been an absolute success. But if you looked at it in terms of data, they've got less money now than their parents had. Their children have achieved less than they achieved and all the rest of it. But what she's talking about was how happy she is. Mm-hmm. The fact she's with a bloke who loves her and she feels absolutely wrapped up in that love. She's got somewhere decent to live that she'll have till she dies. The fact that her health, the problem she's got with her health stopped, but she's permanently disabled, but she remains that. She drinks a bit too much and it might kill her ultimately, but she knows that and she's trying to work with that. But basically she's happy because she's got this bloke in her life and he's been there a long time. And she loves him, and her kids love her. She's got grandkids she loves. And it's how you quantify your own happiness and what success looks like. She don't get it. She's not involved with social care or any of that kind of stuff. But to anyone looking on the out, you'd think she's disabled, she lives in a council bungalow, she ain't got a deal of money, she goes up spoons 2-3 times a week, get arseholed, somebody might have to drive a mobility scooter back. Her whole life to her she's achieved because she thought she'd be dead by the time she was 30. And I think, take success where you can find it. Mm-hmm. So her little speech she did for me was involved a lot of 4-letter words, which I can't repeat on this podcast, but she said he's now one of those with an OBE. And he used to be a fat one of those, and now he's a bit thinner one of those, but he's still always been one of those with an OBE. And you can imagine what that word missing is. Yeah. And that's probably the most authentic speech. And then she stood up and said, and we've won that between us because we are you and you are us. And that's true.
That's lovely, man. That's a perfect way to end this, I think.
All right.
Mark, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate your time.
I hope you've found it at least entertaining.
Absolutely. Always. I call it aspirational entertainment. You know, so I don't want to be too much like, too heavy-handed with the, I want to inspire people. I want people to enjoy it. I want people to come to it and learn. And it is about curiosity. It is about understanding something that they didn't at the start. And I hope at the end of this, people watching, listening, will go, okay, that's made me think differently about these issues. So, no, thank you, Mark. It's been
great. I've enjoyed it.
And we're back. I hope you enjoyed that. As I said at the beginning, my aim for this was not for this to be some dense, heavy, Christ, I want to cry conversation. This is, let's talk about an issue that is massive and only getting worse, and let's talk about the people that are right at the heart of trying to do something about it. Mark is an incredible guy, and that was a joy and an honour to share that conversation, to have that conversation with him. Thank you again, Mark. Thanks to my brother Rob for helping to put this together, and thank you to you again. The end of the series, we've had quite the ride. We are talking, of course, we started off with a bang with Brian Cox. We've had some absolutely amazing guests. I'm not going to name all of them because if I forget one, it'd upset me and possibly them. I'm sure actually they probably don't care, but an incredible series. I'm glad that we've gone to video. Gives us an opportunity to find even more people. We've been listened to tens and tens of thousands of times, charted many times, been watched on YouTube more than 250,000 times in the 2.5-3 months of this series, and that's only going to increase. So I'm excited to come back refreshed, renewed, rebranded, and you'll hear all about that. So if you don't already, subscribe on all of our socials, Starting Line Show. Go to startinglinepod.com and you'll see all the episodes and all the social media and all that stuff. Find us there. hello@startinglinepod.com if you want to chat. I do read every single email, so feel free to get in touch. And yeah, how else do I end this other than to say thank you? I hope that you had a lot of fun, as I have. I hope that you've been inspired and found people's stories entertaining, found the topics we talked about entertaining. We've just had some great people, haven't we? So thank you, as ever. Cheers for the support, subscribing, enjoying it. It means a huge amount to me. I'll be back. Goodbye. Forever. Until next time. Bye.